With their weapons raised to the sky, the line of soldiers moved forward. The knights stopped and held their weapons in front of them, after which they were given the order to go on the offensive to kill the demon. The man in front suddenly took off, moving towards his opponents. The man was a white-haired man with a slightly shabby face. He moved swiftly towards his numerous opponents. At the same time, a line of soldiers pointing their weapons towards the man ran forward. "Attack!" one of the soldiers shouted, flinching as the demon stopped abruptly right in front of him. Behind the white-haired man, 3 wide eyes shrouded in purple energy flashed, and with its help, he struck down several opponents with one blow. He continued to move forward between the opponents, rapidly destroying their formation. He raised his right hand and it was enveloped in purple energy, and a sword hilt began to appear in his palm. Leaning his right hand on his sword, he bent down and touched the ground with his left. A powerful stream of purple energy burst out from underground, moving forward. The knights watched in surprise as the purple flames rapidly grew, engulfing their armor. Because of this flame, everything around was turned into ruins. It destroyed all the enemies that were ahead. After the destruction he had created, the demon exhaled heavily, a stream of blood flowing from his mouth. A haze left by the man's magic rose into the starry night sky. He himself remained motionless in the same position, leaning on his sword and the ground. Streams of energy continued to appear from under his left hand. He looked ahead with a heavy gaze, and more abrasions and traces of dirt appeared on his face. The man gripped the hilt of his sword tighter and grabbed it with his other hand to use it as support and get to his feet. Something that appeared from the side caught his attention and made him look away. A man in metal armor and long blue clothing was approaching him from the side. The man who approached, who was a knight with long red hair, asked the man about the motivation for his actions. The knight girl asked Nox von Reinhafer why he made a deal with the devil, why he betrayed them. The guy, without turning his head, looked in her direction, standing straight and leaning on the sword in front of him. Looking up as if pondering the girl's words, Nox replied, "Betrayed, huh?" He chuckled and said that he hadn't betrayed anyone and it was all about them. He lowered his head and continued to answer, saying that it was he who had been betrayed. The girl had already started screaming, asking Nox to answer when he decided to do this. But, enveloped in purple energy, he looked at the girl with only a slight smile and a tired look. Not taking the girl's words in, Nox said that this was only the beginning and he would return. At the same time, the space around him was filled with a bright white light. Then the space around darkened, and a horizontal blue line cut through it, flashing in the center. The line disappeared, and in its place a sign appeared, which stated that the first part of the game, Inner Lunatic, had ended. The total score was 2-7. The man sitting in front of the monitor noted with satisfaction that the results were quite good, his gaze sliding over the table, littered with crumpled napkins and other debris. Among the rubbish on the table were the remains of cigarettes, from which small streams of smoke were still rising. The completed secret tasks were displayed on the screen. The man himself was pleased that he had also managed to obtain many items. He said all these words with the thought that he had less than a month to live. The calendar on the nightstand marked the 6th day as the day of hospitalization. About 2 years ago, Yu Chong visited the doctor, waiting to hear the results of his examination. When he arrived at the appointment, the doctor opened an image of the young man's brain scan on the monitor. Before telling the boy about the results of the examination, the doctor asked him not to worry. The test results that Yu learned left him in great shock. After the appointment, Yu looked at the test results in his hands with his head down. Attempts to undergo tests and examinations at another hospital yielded similar results. The only thing the doctors could do was prescribe pills to relieve the pain as the condition worsened. He sat with his arms hanging down, trying to comprehend the horrific test results. Continuing to recall these events, he dropped the jar of medicine from his hand. His hand hung limply over the pills scattered across the floor. Recalling the events of 2 years ago, the guy realized that a lot of time had passed since then. Yu turned back, trying to look at the calendar that was on the nightstand. Numerous bags of garbage lay piled up on the floor next to the nightstand. Yu didn't have time to turn around completely, as he had to grimace and cover his mouth with his hand due to a strong cough. He looked blankly at his palm, which had traces of blood on it, and because of them, he again began to think about his possible imminent death. He tried to reassure himself that if he continued to think about it, he would only make his moral state worse. Yu reached for his phone, which made a notification sound for a new message. On the locked screen, he saw that it was a letter from the hospital that hospitalization was ready. With a quick flick of his finger, the guy unlocked his phone screen. The entire correspondence consisted of identical messages, the same as those that had just arrived, and this only irritated Yu. The guy didn't see the point in hospitalization, thinking that he had no relatives anyway, and no one would remember him. He resolutely squeezed the napkin with blood, finally convinced of his decision. Suddenly, his gaze fell on the sheets of paper lying on his desk at hand. These were test results, invitations to hospitalization, church leaflets for people with cancer. With silent fury, he crumpled all those sheets of paper in one swift movement. With the same movement, Yu threw the papers off the table, sending them flying. The guy looked down sullenly. Sweat began to pour down his face. He raised his face, beads of sweat glistening on it, and the monitor was reflected in his eyes. Yu immediately agreed to the offer to start a new game that he saw on the screen. The process of passing the game began with the choice of a name, which became Carl. Sweat continued to pour down his face, and with an empty look, Yu thought about who he should create this time. The monitor displayed the game interface, as well as panels for customizing character characteristics. The original skill was mana sensitivity, and when choosing secondary ones, Yu thought about the swordsmanship option. A notification window appeared on the side, which caught Yu's attention. It was a warning from the system that indicated that the player was getting a penalty for choosing 2 unique skills, and to avoid it, they had to reduce the number to 1. While looking through the additional skills, Yu's gaze caught on the negative section, among which was terminally ill. He immediately thought about choosing this particular skill as compensation. Yu leaned back in his chair, continuing to think that since he had little time in real life, then let it be that way in the character too. After making his choice, a system window appeared in front of him, asking him to confirm the current character settings. The guy didn't hesitate for even a second, and by clicking the button on the mouse, he confirmed his decision. An unexpected, intense glow illuminated the room, causing a strange, growing sensation in Yu's head. A bright blue light appeared behind Yu, and his body stopped obeying. From a sudden weakness in his body, the guy began to fall from the chair straight onto the floor. Everything was swimming before his eyes, and an inexplicable heaviness appeared in his body, which made Yu begin to think that the very moment of his death had arrived, which in his mind looked much different. In the worst case, he would commit suicide, Yu continued to think. Until at that moment, a system window suddenly appeared on the computer screen, saying that character formation had begun. Another system window then appeared, indicating that the character's name had been forcibly changed. Another window announced the start of synchronization. The numbers that appeared changed rapidly. 4%, 6, 19, 71. After the synchronization reached the maximum value, a notification appeared that the character creation was complete. The man lying on the bed began to wake up, the fingers of his hand twitching slightly. The white-haired young man woke up in bed, finding himself in a luxurious room, the interior of which resembled the homes of high-ranking members of society. He sat up from the bed, trying to look around to figure out where he was. The man continued to look around in confusion, trying to figure out what was happening around him. Getting out of bed, he immediately wondered where he was, although the feeling of déjà vu did not leave him. Dressed in just his pajamas, he walked carefully with bare feet through an unknown place. The young man continued to walk through the spacious room, becoming increasingly convinced of his sense of familiarity in this place. Finally, he saw his reflection in the mirror, which immediately made him think that he was in a game. Surprised by what was reflected, he touched the surface of the mirror. The man couldn't believe that the reflection in front of him was of that same Nox, the main villain of the computer game. Nox is the Dark Lord of the game, the youngest son of the Reinhofer family, which is closely connected to the lunatic crime group. In this family, all the children for generations were masters of the sword, magic, and martial arts. But Nox von Reinhofer himself was born not as gifted as his relatives, but defective. To compensate for his shortcomings, he made a pact with a demon from a forgotten kingdom, which led to him becoming a demon lord and the main villain of the game, Inner Lunatic. Yu touched his new body, trying to make sure that this was definitely not a dream and that he really had become Nox. Something appeared behind him, which made the guy turn around. These were status windows that contained information about Nox's basic information, positive and negative skills, and stats. He was happily surprised by the presence of status windows. Looking at the characteristics, the status window showed Stamina 2, Mana 9, Luck 7, Spirit 10, and Charisma 25. But the joy quickly gave way to indignation that some characteristics had too low values. For example, Endurance was equal to 2. He noticed that the only neutral skill he had was Manifestation of Darkness, while the negative skills were Mortally Ill, Curse of Weakness, Frequent Illness, and Transmigration of Souls, which caused a strong reaction. It immediately dawned on Yu that these were the same characteristics he had given the character when he created it. Under the skill was the inscription, Terminally Ill. indicating that the character had exactly 1 year left to live. This made him think that in this place his life would also be very short. After all, when he chose the characteristics for his character, he acted only out of his own desire to create a hero who was as similar to himself as possible. Someone that no one will love and no one will need. And of course, he had no idea that it would all turn out exactly like this. A new system window suddenly appeared in front of Yu's eyes, indicating an unread message, and after a moment of surprise, he immediately opened the email. The unknown sender greeted Yu, doubting that he should now be called Nox. The message caused a slight shock in Yu. The sender knew his real name. It was the same name that his parents had once given him, but whom he had never seen in his entire previous life. Yu wondered if the sender of the letter was the one who had transported him into the game, or if it could be a person from his past. The message on the system screen changed. The sender said that even if Yu didn't remember him, he had something to tell the boy. Surprised, Yu stood there without saying a word, reading the text on the screen, saying that this someone had been following Yu for a long time, for 2 whole years, and that the guy keeps returning to this unknown again and again. That's why this time he greets Yu, congratulating him on his return. Yu asked about how this world was now his reality compared to the past. The unknown sender's words made Yu feel less confident. His hands, previously clenched into tense fists, began to tremble noticeably and uncontrollably with excitement. Despite saying that he would not be able to tell much, the author of the text expressed a desire to help the young man. Yu swallowed nervously, waiting to hear what kind of help they wanted to offer him. The text gave recommendations to enroll in the Eldin Academy, train there, and try to follow the original story. The text window began to disappear, adding at the end that the truth would reveal itself. Yu jerked sharply as the system window, and with it his unknown interlocutor, disappeared. Yu grabbed his head from the thoughts that flooded him about what had happened and decided to first collect his thoughts. The first is the fact that he was reincarnated in the body of the game's main antagonist. He can't deviate too much from the game's main plot, otherwise he will die. And although the reality of the game Inner Lunatic may have become his reality, this did not mean that he had to give up his past memories. No matter the cost, he will follow the main story to regain his memory and understand what he can do in this world. Having collected his thoughts, he decided that he was ready to do anything to achieve this goal. And even if he has to, he will become a real villain just like Nox was. As he thought about this, Yu began to realize that there was no real difference between this life and his past life. He recalled how 2 years ago he learned that he was terminally ill. Terminally ill, every minute just brings you closer to inevitable death, leaving you to live out the remaining moments in anticipation of the end. But in the end, only the situation changed and Yu found himself in a game that he knows like the back of his hand. He turned to the system and it brought up a screen with a date on it, which read February 4th, 1812. Yu involuntarily exhaled when he saw what date it was today, because he didn't have much time left. And since time was short, he decided to begin the 28th attempt at his ideal origin. Determined, the guy moved towards the door to leave the room. Suddenly, a sharp pain appeared in his wrist, which was gripping the door handle. Feeling a painful sensation, Yu wondered in confusion what had just happened. The system window reported that due to the fatal disease skill, a characteristic trait was activated and he developed wrist inflammation. He left the room, continuing to walk down the corridor and thinking about what was happening to the body and its weakness. While Yu was lost in his thoughts and not paying attention to his surroundings, someone crashed into him from the side. The dishes that were in the hands of the man who suddenly appeared flew to the floor, breaking into many pieces. In front of Yu, a maid girl was sitting on the floor, holding her neck and trying to ask who she had bumped into. Realizing that it was young Master Nox himself in front of her, she screamed sharply, and the servants behind her stood motionless out of fear. The guy's first reaction was to grab his sore wrist, internally holding back the feeling of pain. But the next moment he saw familiar features in the girl's appearance. Remembering that it was Rona, the girl fell to her knees, apologizing profusely for bumping into and daring to injure the young gentleman. The only thing Yu could remember about her from the game was that she was spreading rumors about Nox. Looking at her tear-stained and embarrassed face, the guy couldn't believe that this angel incarnate was slandering Nox. Rona winced as Nox leaned towards her with a sly smile and said that he forgave her this time. But if it happens again, Nox continued, maintaining a frightening expression on his face. He was unable to finish the sentence because the frightened girl immediately began to say that she understood everything. It was too quiet around, so Yu raised his head, looking at the servants standing nearby. Several maids and the butler watched the scene with horror on their faces. Catching Nox's gaze, their faces distorted again due to the feeling of fear that arose. Yu stood up, remembering that he was now a crazy Nox, and Rona, who was sitting next to him, was asking the young master where he was going so early. The guy immediately replied that he was now going to the gym. This answer caused great surprise among everyone present. Realizing something, the guy smiled a little artificially, telling Rona to follow him. The girl grabbed her shoulders in fear, immediately assuming that Nox wanted to beat her. The Reinhafer estate was a massive building, comprising several floors with an elaborately painted exterior. Nox, accompanied by Rona, walked along the building, lost in his thoughts. The girl looked at the young gentleman, trying to understand what he was thinking about. At this time, Yu was thinking that his priority goal now was survival. The memories of his last minutes in the past world were now a reminder of the death he had already felt. And since he has already gone through this, Yu does not intend to allow the event to repeat itself. To survive, he needs to get used to the new circumstances as quickly as possible. He has a chance of doing this. Yu didn't notice how he said this out loud while lost in thought. Hearing this fragment of thoughts, Rona looked questioningly at the young master. As someone who had played this game 27 times, he knew all its pitfalls. In a half-whisper, so that the maid wouldn't hear, the guy called up the status window. A system window, visible only to him, immediately appeared in front of him. You recalled that the game, Inner Lunatic, told the story of the confrontation between angels and demons in the Empire, which attracted many fans around the world. The game's unique feature was the huge selection of character settings and traits, and when low-ranking characteristics like normal and talented could be selected as many times as you wanted. Unique game skills could only be used once. Having unique skills makes it easy to reach the top, and Nox, in whose body Yu was now located, had several such skills. This game also has a concept of penalty stats, which occurs when the selected skill exceeds its limits. Thanks to the advantage of the system that analyzes the player and selects the penalty skill, you can choose two unique ones. Nox now possessed the skill of swordsmanship and martial arts, which allowed him to reach the pinnacle of fencing and combat mastery. But there was also a skill called mana sensitivity, which allowed one to use magic more effectively. Thinking about it, you realized that there were a lot of useful skills in general. This was also the main character's privileged skill, Vision, which opens up a window to the owner of the status of other characters, or acting skills, which allows one to behave naturally in any situation, which you wouldn't mind. A cool mind helps one to maintain calm and a clear view of the situation in battle. You continued to recall. There was only one problem, that all this was accompanied by negative characteristics, and the mortally ill that Nox had was perhaps one of the worst. Even if that wasn't his only negative skill, Yu grinned resignedly, realizing that he was a walking collection of diseases. Having anemia, the player could not step on cold surfaces without warming spells, and if you have a weak immunity, the character will faint at least 5 times per chapter. Having thought all this over, Yu came to the conclusion that he probably had no chance of achieving his goal. He will solve problems as they arise, the guy thought, looking at the sky. As they reached the training hall, Rona wondered if Nox was really going there. There were some peculiarities about the young gentleman that attracted her attention. Nox stood outside the building, looking up with unusual confidence. She looked at the young gentleman, continuing to stand silently nearby. The guy opened the entrance gate to the room, where he was first greeted by the family crest hanging on the wall. Nox had a curse of weakness, where the player's development speed and resistance to enemy attacks were halved from birth. And it was precisely the curse of weakness that Yu planned to get rid of first. The wooden practice sword was raised directly above his head, its tip pointing towards the ceiling. Yu held the sword, gripping its hilt tightly with both hands, thinking that in the end he could only draw one conclusion. With a sharp movement, he lowered the sword in front of him, and at the same time, numerous drops of sweat flew off it. The realization immediately came to his mind that the worst was obviously in store for him. The sword fell from the young man's hands. He thought that when he had just started playing the game, he had come to the same conclusion. Tired, Yu fell onto the stone floor with his arms spread out, continuing to take in air. Now he couldn't swing his sword more than 10 times, and the curse of weakness only made things worse. Yu looked around. There were canvases hanging on the walls, and they also had various types of weapons. Sitting on the floor, the guy noted that the choice of weapons here was quite large. This was due to the fact that the Reinhafer family line is based on the art of fencing. There are many phrases one could use to describe the Reinhafers, but the best one is Home of Blade and Darkness. This nickname arose due to the family members' swordsmanship and black magic skills in battle, and the commander's blade was to blame for this. Also called the Merciless Blade of Darkness, a sword traditionally passed down from the head of a family to his successor. There was no benefit to Yu in this, so he thought about the advantages of a noble family other than swordsmanship. He thought with particular trepidation about the main advantage of a rich family, namely, their great financial status. The guy happily accepted the fact that in his situation, money was not an issue. As one of the most noble families in the game's history, the Reinhafers were incredibly wealthy. So even their useless younger brother didn't have to worry about money. Besides, the head of the family, Theo, didn't care what Nox spent his money on. And besides, Nox, the youngest son of a noble family, was not that type of character. Yu's personality was clear, and he planned to make the most of it. He rose to his feet with difficulty, clutching his shaking knees. Yu thought that as long as Rona was willing to fulfill his requests, he didn't even need to run. He was convinced of this with a specific example a few minutes ago. At his request, the girl brought him all the necessary things that he asked for. She reported to the young master that the wooden sword, water, and towel had been prepared. Rona looked at Nox, her mind filled with surprise that he was going to train. After making sure that no one was nearby, Yu called the maid over to him. She immediately flinched in fear, assuming that Nox wanted to hit her. Ye was surprised by this reaction. He asked where she got that idea from. He took the girl by the ear, leaning towards her and telling her to listen carefully. After listening to the young master's words, Rona agreed, but a little later the meaning of his words dawned on her. She was suddenly surprised, asking if he really wanted to spend a huge amount of money in this way. Rona continued to say that everything she had just heard sounded like complete nonsense. Yak raised his fist, telling her to shut up and do as she was told. This became the convincing factor. The girl quickly left to carry out the assignment, thinking that Nox had not changed at all. After the maid left the room, Yu was left alone in the training room. The training sword lying on the floor was a reminder of recent unsuccessful exercises. As he approached the table, Yu thought that, although in theory everything should be ready by tomorrow, he wasn't sure how quickly Rona would manage. The guy took a glass and poured himself some tea, which the maid had brought earlier. He exhaled, not expecting that trying to get rid of the curse would be so disastrous. Someone appeared quietly next to him, greeting young Master Nox. "You!" the boy said in surprise, spilling his tea from the suddenness. Before him stood the head butler, Rudvel D. Ernark, one of the main managers of the Reinhafer estate. He was also someone who was not so easy to deal with. An advisor to Nox's father, the head of the family, Theo von Reinhafer. That was the kind of man Rudwell was. Nox's hand holding the mug began to tremble from the overwhelming excitement. Looking at Rudvel, Yu understood that he would have a rather difficult time with him. He thought that the butler shouldn't have any business with Nox. The guy calmly put the mug on the table, realizing that now he could resolve the situation. The acting skill activated, and Yu asked why Rudvel was here instead of serving the head of the family. In response, the man replied that he had come to share news with Nox after receiving orders. The news was that Nox had been ordered to join the dinner that evening. Yu was inwardly surprised by this unexpected news, not understanding why he had invited Nox to dinner. Addressing Rudvel, he said to convey that he would not be able to join today. Now, Rudvel himself did not understand why the head of the family would invite his youngest son to dinner. The butler reported that the mistress of the Stilner family had visited them and was looking for nightly training. Therefore, the young master's refusal to join the dinner might infuriate his father. Hearing this, Yu let out a strange breath, saying that he now understood and directed his gaze into the void. The unexpected reaction and the look turned somewhere to the side caused confusion in Rudvel. The butler noted that the young gentleman was not himself today, which prompted a counter-question from Yu to clarify the reason. The butler noticed that Nox had come to the training hall on his own today, even though he had never been interested in swords before. He asked directly if he could ask why the young master had come here. Nox looked at the man seriously, saying he needed to clarify something. Even though Rudvel is the head butler, he shouldn't even think about crossing his young master's path. What Nox does or what his intentions are should not concern a man. Only he himself determines his actions. Such a sharp answer made the head butler fall silent and swallow nervously. He bowed, placing his hand on his chest, and said that he apologized. Nox didn't answer but simply turned around and silently walked out of the training room. The butler, also remaining silent after the conversation, watched the young man leave. He wondered if Nox had actually noticed something and that this needed to be reported to the head of the family. After leaving the gym, Yu quickly walked across the courtyard and reached his quarters. Stepping inside, he quickly slammed the door and pressed his back against it. Excited, he tried to comprehend what had just happened. Yu thought that if his possession were to activate, everything would get worse. But what was more important now was the news he heard about the arrival of the young mistress of the Stillner family. The main question now was precisely what she was doing here. As it was time for dinner, the Reinhofer family began to gather in the dining room. One of the brothers reasoned that because of the idiot who had come, he would probably not be able to enjoy his meal today. Knox, to whom these words were addressed, sat silently at the table, not reacting in any way. The Hardys twins and Alan continued to mock Knox, asking him again not to say that he regretted being in this family. They couldn't believe that Knox actually dared to show up here. They discussed rumors about Knox's recent glances with the maid, drawing conclusions about his hopelessness. Yu, without reacting to these words, looked at the twins, thinking that he had done nothing at all. The creak of the doors opening at the main entrance to the dining room was heard. The maids stood in a bow, and an unknown male voice said that, apparently, everyone had gathered. Yu directed his gaze towards the person entering, starting to stand up from his seat. The man who entered was a gray-haired man, Theo von Reinhofer, the head of the family, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. The young man held back his internal tension. Now, together with the head of the family, everyone was gathered. Theo was accompanied by a young red-haired girl who greeted those present. Talia von Stillner introduced herself, adding that she was glad to see everyone. Theo clarified that the girl had arrived to undergo knightly training and therefore would be living in the estate for now. "She's training to become a knight," the twins whispered, looking in her direction. The head of the family addressed the girl, telling her to feel at home here, that she was welcome. Talia is the heroine of the game Inner Lunatic, a character who opposes the future villain Knox. And it is precisely this man who will soon plunge his blade into Knox's body. Theo looked at the family's youngest child, noticing that he had apparently decided to join in on the dinner. The young man silently looked away, not responding to the comment directed at him. This reaction caused Talia to silently question, while the head of the family called on everyone to begin eating. The dinner had a large menu, including meat dishes with various side dishes, and various fruit desserts. You noticed how the twins, whispering about something, glanced in his direction. They approached their father, saying that it might finally be time to make a decision. Decide which of the brothers present will go to Elaine's academy. The head of the family thought for a moment, agreeing with his son that it was time to make a choice. You recalled that Elaine's academy was the most important location in the entire Inner Lunatic. The students of the academy face various dangers and fight demons, which forms the basis of the game's story. For you, getting into the academy was now the top priority to fulfill his goal. After all, in addition to following the original story, he needs to make allies. Theo continued, reminding his sons that the Academy's rules stipulated that only 3 candidates per family could attend. Thus, the Academy controls the role of aristocratic influence. Because 2 Reinhofer candidates had already entered the Academy, only one of the remaining brothers would be able to attend, he concluded. You thought that before finding allies, he would do anything to get into the Academy. The father continued by saying that because of these conditions, he decided to follow the family traditions. "So you're going to start a fight between us brothers?" Knox joined in the conversation. Theo looked towards his youngest son, not expecting him to be the first to react. "Yes, in a month, we will choose a family representative through a duel that will take place in the training hall," the head of the family announced. The twins chuckled and advised Knox not to embarrass himself, as the weakling idiot who had never even held a sword had no chance against them. Knox began to answer, while Talia, who was sitting next to him, watched the verbal confrontation with interest. The younger brother calmly replied to the twins that they would only start gossiping after victory. These words caused indignation among the older brothers. They asked whether someone like him seriously thought he could defeat them. Yu looked at the drink in his glass and thought that the duel was another test that he needed to pass. Still thinking about how he didn't want to listen to the twins' nonsense, he collected his thoughts. Knox announced in front of everyone that he would be the one to get into the academy. Hearing these words, the head of the family looked towards his youngest son. The twins, their faces distorted with aggression, looked towards their brother. These words attracted the guest of their estate, who laughed slightly. "The young master seems confident in his abilities," she asked, looking at Knox with a smile. Although his face was expressionless in response to this comment, internally he realized with horror what had been said. After all, attracting Talia's attention was a pretty big mistake on his part. After the evening meal, the head of the family returned to his office. In front of him on the table lay a stack of sheets of paper covered with text. After reviewing the report, he agreed with Rudwell, who stood before him, that some changes had taken place in Knox. The head butler leaned over and said that something like this was very noticeable. Theo reflected that he himself would not have believed it if he had not witnessed what happened at dinner. But the reason for the sudden changes was unclear. Knox couldn't have been possessed by a demon, could he? In any case, he had attracted his father's attention, so Theo finally agreed with Rudwell. The head of the family ordered the head butler to continue to monitor Knox. The next morning, the maids in the courtyard were heatedly discussing the man working in the courtyard. They looked at the sweaty Knox running around, surprised by the young gentleman's reappearance in the training hall. They had only just heard rumors about the duel that would take place in a month, but it had already become the main topic of discussion. But the maids couldn't understand why the only thing the young master did was run. Yu looked back in their direction, not understanding why he clearly heard every word they said, since he didn't have any hearing-related skills. He continued running training to improve his endurance. The system window showed that his stamina had increased by 1/10, a number that was so low that Yu felt disappointed. The reason he only ran was because of his main problem, which was low endurance. To use the sword and martial arts skill, he needs to have a stamina level of at least 4 points. And if he weren't that weakling Knox, he could of course easily use this skill. But because the curse of weakness he possessed was still there, he couldn't achieve these figures. Yu stood in place, bringing his breathing back to normal after a long run. After a month of daily running training, he was only able to raise his endurance value to just below 2 points. It was the inevitable impact of the curse of weakness that cuts development progress in half. And even after such a grueling run, he only gained 1/10 of a point. The side effects of being terminally ill made things worse, so the young man would have to put in 4 times more effort than others. Due to the skill mortally ill, Knox's maximum stamina value was 15 points. Someone approached, bringing in front of him a table with strange objects of various shapes. It was Rena, who said that she had brought the items that the young master had asked to purchase. Thanks to these items, in Yu's opinion, the matter should have gone faster, he said, and thought that the girl had finished faster than he expected. While thinking about how he could reach the 4th level, he looked at the items on the table, namely the 3-headed Gorgon's poison, Memory Fairy's tears, Golem's heart, and the rapid endurance increase scroll of a solution to the problem with endurance. Yu uses the knowledge he has about this world. After carefully examining the items laid out in front of him, Yu decided to move from the open courtyard to a more suitable enclosed place. When they moved to the training room, Rena asked about the reason for the need for these items. She asked if it was possible to get by with just a scroll, since poison, like other things, was dangerous for ordinary people. The guy replied that ordinary people simply didn't know how to use the items she called dangerous. Rena asked again what he meant by the correct use of these items. The guy slowly turned to the table, looking carefully at all the objects located on its surface. His hand confidently reached for the small purple bottle, which he knew contained a deadly poison. Without a second's hesitation, the guy put his lips to the bottle and began drinking its contents. The young master's reckless action caused Rena to react in surprise, because it was poison. He himself knew that the contents were mortally dangerous, and a painful expression appeared on his face. His focused gaze was fixed on something that appeared right in front of his face. The information window that appeared indicated a temporary increase in health by 50%. The next window showed a 10-minute timer counting down to his death. The boy almost fell from the sudden weakness that arose throughout his body, grabbing the edge of the table to stay on his feet. Rena rushed to call the head butler, but Knox ordered her to stay put. He picked up another object from the table, round and cinnamon-colored, biting off a piece of it. The maid grabbed her head in horror, loudly saying that this golem heart was absolutely inedible. The system window reported that due to the consumption of the golem heart, Yu would gradually begin to petrify. The combination of the absorbed items activated the secret recipe. Yu was glad that his plan was working flawlessly. That's all, he thought, calming down. But his face still retained a painful expression. Golem's heart is commonly used to turn people to stone or strengthen defenses, as well as to create artificial golems. But when this item is combined with the 3-headed Gorgon's venom, a secret recipe is activated. The interaction of these ingredients produces a completely different effect. The system window showed information that the curse of weakness was beginning to disappear. Yu clenched his fist in victory, as he was able to remove the curse of weakness from Knox's body. Rena, who was watching all this, was completely at a loss, expecting that the young master was about to die soon. While Yu was thinking about the last step remaining, Rena asked about his condition. Looking through her fingers at the young man, she suddenly fell silent, seeing his next actions. A sweaty Knox began to unbutton his shirt, causing the girl to let out another surprised cry. With a flushed face, she watched as the young gentleman's hand reached for the white bottle. After opening the bottle, Yu poured its contents onto his head. and the system reported contact with the item Tears of the Memory Fairy. Thanks to this item, the petrification effect caused by the golem's heart was neutralized. Moreover, as in previous cases after use, the objects began to interact with each other. Drenched in tears, Yu stood with a small smile, aware of the strange sensations. The system windows reported the activation of another secret recipe. Yu temporarily received the skill Gift of Progress. The positive skill, Gift of Progress, gave the user the ability to increase progress by 100% until they reached level 5. Yu confidently clenched his fist in a determined pose. Everything happened exactly as he planned. Thinking that there was only one last step left, Yu reached for another scroll-like object. Unrolling the scroll, the boy tore it, this action causing glowing seals to appear around his hands. The guy used a scroll of rapid stamina growth, thanks to which his stamina growth was doubled. Yu managed to remove the curse, and since the items he used gave a massive increase in progress, his progress rate should now exceed that of normal people. He confidently thought that now, after all the manipulations carried out, his endurance should begin to grow much faster than before. He confidently thought that now, after all the manipulations carried out, his endurance should begin to grow much faster than before. There were tears on her face, and she tearfully asked if everything was okay with the young master. Because the guy started to undress abruptly, she thought he had gone crazy. Nox, clutching in pain, told her to bring him a towel. Tears were already streaming from Rina's eyes, and she looked at the guy, blushing and sobbing. You thought that since the curse of weakness was now lifted, maybe he should be a little more gentle with the maid. He smiled confidently, saying that naturally everything was fine with him. Rina asked if it was really not worth calling the head butler, or if the young master didn't want to rest. Nox also replied that everything was fine with him, and the girl asked him in response what he was going to do now. Smiling slightly, he replied that he was going for a run now. The courtyard of the Reinhofer estate was illuminated by soft morning light. Repeating the same thing as every day before, the boy continued running around the yard. Only this time he wasn't alone, because Rina was running after him, holding a towel in her hands. Someone was watching the two of them running from behind the gate bars. The man, leaning on his hand, looked at the running Nox and wondered, why would such a weakling take part in a fight against his brothers? Thalia asked, watching what was happening. The maid assigned to her, Emma, pointed out to the girl that it was inappropriate to glare at the youngest son of the Reinhofer family like that. The maid continued to say that such behavior was bad form, but Talia still did not understand Nox's actions. He doesn't wield a sword, he just runs in circles, the girl continued asking. She was even more surprised by the fact that even the Reinhofer knights volunteered to help Nox, but he refused. In a month, as a result, it will be torn to pieces, that's all, Talia concluded. She was sure that as a result of the battles between the brothers, he would face complete defeat. But what does it matter to me anyway, she thought, finally deciding that she had had enough. The last words caused misunderstanding on the part of the maid standing nearby. Talia told Emma that she would be back soon, and she went in a direction known only to her. The girl walked through the yard, passing the places where Nox had recently run. She reached a certain place and stopped, her shadow falling on the tile in front of the sitting man. Nox looked at the man who approached in surprise, and Rina, who was lying next to him without strength, asked him to stop. I'm Thalia, the girl said loudly, smiling and looking straight at the young man in front of her. He looked up at her, and inside Yu was frightened and wondering why she had approached him. As he stood up, he asked what she wanted and reminded her that she had already introduced herself. Surprised by this reaction, Talia tried to understand why the guy was acting so cold. She came to the unequivocal conclusion that this attitude was caused by the fact that the guy was simply struck by her beauty. Nox stood nearby with a question on his face. Talia asked if it was true that Nox agreed to participate in the fight because he was confident of his victory over his older brothers. With the same expressionless face, the guy continued to look at Talia. She continued talking, asking if he was sure that running could help him and that he had even a small chance of winning. Rina, who was listening to all this, agreed with the words. Thalia put her hand to her chest and said enthusiastically that if the guy asked her for help, she would be happy to help. No thank you, Nox immediately replied, surprising the girl and adding at the end a request for her to go somewhere far away. Thalia's face flushed. How dare he behave like that when she kindly offered him her help? Rina grabbed her face. She couldn't say out loud to the young master now that girls don't like that tone of voice towards them. Forget it! Thalia shouted sharply, her face angry as she walked away. As she passed Nox, she brushed against him with her shoulder, telling him to do whatever she wanted. The boy found this small collision painful. Yu looked at the irritated girl with confusion. And Rena sighed and thought that the young master really didn't understand anything. The guy thought that after these events, his relationship with the Stillner's daughter would only worsen. Using the vision skill, he opened the window of Talia's characteristics, and her main parameters and attributes appeared in front of him. Besides that, she had many positive skills. You immediately thought that she was obviously talented. In inner lunatic. Even the strongest male characters had stamina above 4 points, and even now Talia's figure was 6. Remembering the strongest characters in the game universe, you thought. Abilities were high. They were incomparable to the continent's 3 great swordmasters, one of whom was Theo von Reinhofer, Nox's father, or comparable to the skills of one of the 4 great magicians. But at the same time, Talia had every chance to rise to their level. Or reminded himself that the main element the girl used was fire. As the owner of this particular element, she was already certainly capable of killing a number of demons. One of the features of the fire magic that Talia uses is the ability to awaken white flames, which she later uses to kill Nox. You thought that making Talia his ally would change the story too much, and he needed to stick to the original as much as possible to avoid death. And so he doubted whether it was even possible to be on good terms with a person who would ultimately bring you death. In this way, the month of waiting for the selection for admission to the Duel Academy flew by quickly. One day, Thalia was walking down the corridor, lost in her thoughts. She recalled the past weeks during which she trained with the Reinhofer family. All the instructors and competitors praised her unanimously, emphasizing how quickly she learned, and they always added that such a result could not be expected from the pride of the Stillner family. The phrase about the Stillner family's pride evoked in her the very opposite feelings and memories one would expect. A memory of the stern gaze of red eyes looking down at her came to mind. A tall girl with a short red hairdo stood before her, holding a sword. On the duel field, a girl stood before her, clutching the sword and looking at Talia with only a slight turn of her head. The defeated girl sat on the floor, defeated by her sister, trying to reach the knocked-out sword with her hand. The memories of this duel only made her withdraw further into herself. Calming herself, Talia tightened her grip on the hilt of the sword hanging on her belt. Looking down at the sky, she doubted whether she had enough skill to become a true knight. After all, a knight must always remain humble, sacrifice himself for the greater good, and, to be considered worthy, must master the art of swordsmanship. Talia exhaled, wondering how Nox was ever going to defeat the brothers who had trained and prepared for years. In her opinion, an outcome in which the younger one could defeat his brothers was simply impossible. At dawn, another day illuminated the courtyard of the estate, and the courtyard was unusually empty. The same light, falling from the windows, illuminated the training room, where an important event was to take place today. A crowd of people gathered around 2 brothers who were about to meet in the deli. It was Nox and one of the twins. From the second-floor balcony, Thalia and Rudvel were standing and watching them, with 2 people sitting nearby in separate chairs. The woman sitting on the chair with a stern look was Facilia, the first wife of the head of the family, Theo von Reinhofer. The man caught the head butler's attention, and he immediately turned around. Looking down with a stern gaze, Theo asked the butler's opinion on the outcome of the duel. Rudwell looked down, collecting his thoughts, but was interrupted. The man who acted as second in this duel attracted everyone's attention. He announced that the official duel to determine who is worthy of admission to the Elden Academy has begun. Yu held the long sword out in front of him, preparing to engage in battle. But he didn't have time to do anything, as his brother was already in front of him, already raising his sword above himself to strike. Sometime before the start of the match, a conversation took place between the brothers on the second floor. Theo asked Rudwell what outcome he saw at the end of this battle. The head butler replied that, given the results of young Master Allen's recent battles, victory was definitely his. Looking at the battle site, the head of the family briefly replied that he was of the same opinion. Listening to this, Facilia looked tensely towards the young men standing below. Rudwell, who caught this glance, was surprised and thought that the head could have a different opinion on this matter. He thought that although Nox had indeed changed, his victory would be unpleasant because it would be a manifestation of blatant injustice. Rudwell followed the path of becoming a knight right up to the head of the family and realized that the art of swordsmanship can be deceptively mesmerizing. But its essence is terribly simple. No matter how much you hone your skills, there remains only one final result. There is only one lever that can turn everything in your direction and break down the wall that cannot be overcome. This lever, which is available only to a few, was an incomprehensible talent. Rudel looked at Nox carefully, wondering if the young gentleman was gifted in such a way. The butler was pulled out of his thoughts when the head of the family continued speaking. Nox still has Reinhafer blood in his veins, so there's a chance his youngest son was born with the talent of a sword emperor, he said. Standing on the battlefield, seeing that the sword and martial arts skill had not been activated, Yu cursed inwardly. He wondered why, even with high luck, he couldn't activate the skill in this situation. He recalled his training when his endurance grew slowly, 1/10 at a time. One such day, he continued to run around the estate courtyard as usual. Reina, who was following him, turned to the young master to ask something. Out of breath and tearful as usual, she asked if she had to run after him. At first he started to answer something, but then he said, wiping his face, that who if not Rena would take care of him. The girl clarified that at first he wanted to say about something else. Nox handed her back the towel and said there was another task for her. Hearing this answer, Rena pouted with displeasure, to which the guy said that she had probably already cursed him in her thoughts a bunch of times. The girl took the towel and replied that this was absolutely not true. She simply bit her tongue. Ya suddenly just laughed at the situation that had happened. Realizing that she had been running after him all this time, he decided to look at her stats to see her stamina value. A system window appeared in front of him, displaying the values of Rena's characteristics. The stamina value of 4.5 points caused a strong reaction in Yu. The maid was stronger than the average man in this world. He was annoyed that her starting characteristics were higher than those he had been achieving for a whole month. Rena said that it was already evening and there would be a duel tomorrow, so the young master needed to rest. Looking up at the sky, Yu himself thought about how quickly the days of preparation had flown by. Returning to the moment before the duel began, Alan turned to his younger brother. Alan told him that while the fight had not yet begun, it was not too late for him to surrender. He laughed, saying that he couldn't fight at full strength with his younger brother, even though he was a disgrace to the family. But Nox felt that his brother, on the contrary, was not averse to fighting. Alan agreed, admitting that he wanted to impress the Stilner family's daughter, something his younger brother could help him with. Looking towards the balcony, Nox expressed uncertainty that this girl was a good choice. As Alan continued talking about Talia, Yu thought that his brother, who had a stamina value of 8, would not be so easy to defeat. He didn't have time to continue thinking, as his second announced the opening of a duel for a place to enter the academy. The man continued, saying that whatever the outcome of the battle between Alan and Nox, they would accept it without objection. Yu felt nervous because if he failed at this stage, it would all be over. He still needed to recover his memories and find out who the sender of the letter was, because he would die in a year. Gathering his thoughts, he gripped the hilt of his sword with determination. The second announced that if the participants were ready, the duel between them would begin. As soon as he finished his last word, Alan was already in front of Nox with his sword raised. Nox jumped to the side, dodging the sword that struck the stonework. The older brother followed this movement and immediately added a kick. Nox, who only had time to dodge, cursed, holding his sword in front of him. This action was enough for him to block the attack, but Nox still flew back several meters. His left hand trembled, but he continued to hold the sword in a position to block the attack. Alan laughed loudly, sarcastically praising his younger brother's well-timed block. He immediately launched a second attack on Nox, causing him to remember the game again. This was his least favorite part. If he loses now, then he has no further way, but if he can win. A system window appeared in front of him, informing him that his stamina had been increased by 1/10 of a point. Yu drew himself away from the battle and quickly glanced at the system window that had appeared. He chuckled and said out loud that if he wins now, he will be invincible later. Alan didn't understand the meaning of his brother's words, and therefore assumed that he had received too few blows to the head. Having suggested adding more, the elder brother rushed into another repeated attack. Facilia thought it was foolish to pay attention to the change in Nox, since it was her son Alan, who would be the one getting into the academy. Alan delivered another powerful blow, from which, even while defending himself, Nox was unable to stay on his feet and fell to the floor. It was a pathetic sight, Theo said, causing the woman to turn to look at him. Leaning on his hand, the man watched the battle unfolding with a bored look. She smiled quietly, thinking that one day something would happen to this family. Her thoughts were interrupted by Theo. He said that because of the changes, Nox was expecting this battle, but his skills were terrible. Rudel asked if he should stop the battle. After all, if this continues, the young master will have to spend a long time recovering after the battle. Theo reflected that while Alan and Hardis were talented, they were nothing compared to the family's first son, Garen. He had the ability to keep everything under control and incredible strength with which he overwhelmed his opponent, Theo thought. Nox stood on the field, bent over with fatigue and barely able to hold his sword. The head of the family exhaled, The question of who would ultimately receive the dark sword was once again pressing in his mind. He began to rise from his seat, already determined to stop this senseless duel. Another system window about increasing stamina appeared in front of Nox. His body was enveloped in a powerful flow of energy of the old and yellow colors. The skill, sword, and martial arts has been activated, the system reported. When it finally happened, Nox, who had barely been able to stand, laughed. Already confident of his victory, Alan asked if his younger brother had gone crazy. And then the system window announced the activation of the unique skill, Genius Time. Theo's gaze, rising from his seat, froze in one direction. Around Nox, who held the sword, energy transformed into clockwork-like parts. Everything around became more gray and blurry. The people on the balcony froze in one pose. Alan, who had raised his sword to attack, also froze in one position. And at that moment, you remembered that he had heard somewhere that every unique talent has its own time. And now is the perfect moment to demonstrate one of his own unique skills. The entire space around them instantly slowed down thanks to the activated skill, which allowed him to slow down everything that entered his field of vision. The enemy moves slowly, while you can maintain his normal speed, so it will be difficult to make the most of this skill. But if we take into account the important fact that at the moment another skill called Sword and Martial Arts Mastery was also active, now the final outcome of this battle between the brothers could already be considered predetermined. Time began to pass normally. Nox made a sharp lunge, knocking the sword out of his brother's hands with one blow. Alan stood in complete shock and stared ahead, unable to immediately comprehend what exactly had just happened. The battle sword, knocked out of his hands, flew away from its owner, who was completely bewildered with a loud clang. Yu pulled his hand back, taking a fighting stance, confident that he was the winner in this duel. The sword, thrown back by the powerful blow, continued to fly backwards uncontrollably, bouncing off the stone floor of the hall several times with a crash. Alan dropped to one knee, clutching his aching hand, glaring at his younger brother. Nox confidently grabbed his sword with his hand, then raised its blade above himself. Looking at Alan sitting on the floor, he said that what was happening was funny. "What?" Alan said, not understanding his brother's behavior and still feeling pain in his arm. Yu watched, thinking that even in this situation he still couldn't relax. The skill's effect only lasts for 5 minutes, so no matter how, he must manage to fit within the limit. Nox stated that he had not fought Alan at full strength up until this point. He spread his arms and turned to his older brothers, saying that he was bored with what was happening. The guy suggested that the twins finish everything faster and attack him together. Both brothers exclaimed in surprise upon hearing this unexpected and bold statement. Nox approached his father with a request to allow him to fight both brothers at the same time. This proposal caused unexpected surprise in Theo, who a minute ago was about to end the duel. Those around him were no less surprised. Rudville watched the reaction of the head of the family. Talia wondered inwardly what the Reinhaffer's youngest son was planning. The head of the family thought that Nox's energy had really changed. Perhaps he had an ace up his sleeve. He extended his hand, giving his permission for a 2-on-1 fight. Facilia jumped up from her seat, trying to attract her husband's attention. But ignoring the reactions of those around him, the head of the family announced the start of a renewed duel of 2 against 1. Rising from the floor, Alan irritably reached for his sword, which had been knocked out earlier. Hartis was outraged at how this brat dared to humiliate them in front of his father. Nox remained calm, holding his sword in front of him as he looked straight at the twins. The twins held their swords in front of them, looking angrily at their younger brother. They shouted at him to get ready. Both brothers rushed at him in a swift attack, swinging their swords. With a loud metallic ringing, the first full-fledged clash of blades between all 3 combatants occurred. With one precise movement, Nox managed to stop both swords aimed at him from different sides. The brothers exchanged shouts, Alan telling them to be faster and approach him from the left. Hartis did not agree with these decisions and advised his brother to just shut up. The younger brother continued to dodge and parry the blows that continued to come his way. Due to the activation of the skill Genius Time, the skill Low-Level Dark Family Swordsman has increased. You realize that his swordsmanship continued to improve, and he could now see the sword's movements more clearly. The brothers continued to only loudly curse among themselves when their next joint attack was easily repelled by Nox. And with the next movement, Nox wounded both of them at the same time, passing behind them. The brothers stood, clutching their wounded shoulders, looking at Nox, who stood at a distance. Talia continued to watch the fight with growing interest, becoming increasingly surprised by Nox's suddenly revealed skills. The guy turned around with a grin. He understood what was written on the brothers' faces. These were attempts to understand how the Knox family's shame had changed so dramatically. The twins turned and looked at each other with alarm. They tried to discuss something, but Knox, who was standing nearby, abruptly interrupted them. Appearing between the brothers, he reminded them that he had told them not to get distracted during the fight. With a wide swing of his sword, he made a blow that hit the twins standing to the side of him. Alan and Hardis were forced to jump aside to avoid powerful blows while defending. You thought that at least this fight was needed first and foremost for the further development of the story. These kinds of sword fights gave him a pleasant feeling inside. He thought the fight was fun, and made a particularly strong lunge at one of the brothers. Talia moved closer to the edge of the balcony, while Rudville, standing nearby, watched what was happening with no less surprise. Even greater shock was on the face of the head of the family, who looked at the battle in surprise. Hardis, who thought this should be impossible, looked at Knox. And then a powerful blow reached him too, and Hartes flew to the floor, landing painfully. Now both twins were sitting on the floor, scared and unsure whether they could continue the fight. By this point, the system notified that the Genius Time skill had ended. Knox remained standing, looking at his fallen opponents. Looking down at them, he thought that perhaps the battle was now over. Standing on the second floor, Felicia tried to get the attention of her sons, Alan and Hardis. Knox rudely approached the judge, asking if the winner had already been chosen, and he hesitantly replied that he had. "The winner is young Mr. Knox von Reinhafer," the second announced. Hardis was in complete dismay and upset, thinking that such a humiliating defeat simply could not have happened in reality. He landed weakly on the floor, the sword falling from his limp hand with a noise. The heavy sword struck the hard stone floor tiles and made a ringing sound several times in a row. Theo looked at the battlefield with a strange expression, which did not end as he expected. Yu, seeing this look, was satisfied, and a slight grin appeared on his face. He bowed before those present, saying that since the fight was over, he would now perhaps go. Silently, he confidently walked towards the exit of the training hall. For some reason known only to her, Talia rushed after Knox. By that time, the guy was already at the very arch of the hall's exit, almost completely hidden by it. Now she was convinced that she needed to talk to Knox urgently. Meanwhile, the first orange reflections of the approaching evening had already appeared in the sky. Yu stood in the square leaning on his knees. Now he could finally gather his strength and catch his breath. He slowly raised his palm in front of him, on which he saw with surprise traces of fresh blood. Yu was surprised. Apparently the blood was the result of him using the skill for too long. The bonus skill has a major drawback, and due to the limit being exceeded, it received a negative kickback effect. Upon receiving this restriction, the user's life is reduced by 2 days and 17 hours, the system reported. The consequences were the worst possible, since the time taken could not be returned, and Knox was already terminally ill. The main thing is that there were no witnesses now, otherwise his admission to the academy would have definitely been cut short. Someone spoke to Knox, causing him to break away from his thoughts. The person who approached was Thalia, who asked if he was injured. "You were wounded during the fight," she continued to clarify with a worried expression on her face. Yu thought irritably about this girl's sudden display of attention towards him. The guy lamented why, of all possible people, Thalia found out about this. It was impossible for Theo to find out about it later. Yu was just about to answer something, but the girl interrupted him, asking how such a weakling managed to defeat 2 people in a duel. These unexpected words made the guy fall silent and just looked at Talia in surprise. The girl stood with a flushed face, shyly twirling a lock of hair between her fingers. "I think you misunderstood me," she said, looking away with a worried expression. Just a month ago, she saw Knox, who had never held a sword in his hands. On that day, all he could do was clumsily practice with a training sword. There was no way someone like that would have a chance of winning, so it was all down to natural talent. And now, Talia was obliged to find out how he had awakened and developed such talent. But after the fight was over, when he was left alone, he looked worn out and tired. The girl could not understand what caused this and what was ultimately happening to the guy. How can a man who just defeated his brothers with his talent and uniqueness now find himself in a sorry state? The rumors turned out to be untrue, and Knox wasn't such a hopeless loser, Talia continued to think. In fact, he is the kind of person who goes out of his way to achieve his victory. Knox coughed, covering his mouth with his hand, which brought the girls back from their thoughts. "Are you okay?" Thalia asked, taking a step and extending her hand towards the young man. With a sharp, quick movement, he pushed away the girl's hand that was extended towards him. "Get your hands off me," Knox said sharply, looking disdainfully at the girl. Inside, Yu was going crazy, admitting that over the past 2 years spent in gambling addiction, He had truly forgotten how to communicate with people. Despite his inner turmoil, he tried to keep Nox's face looking indifferent, especially since Talia would kill him in the future. The girl, worried, nervously fiddled with her fingers trying to say something. Having collected her thoughts, she said sheepishly that she was apologizing to the guy. The young man looked in her direction, not understanding why she was now apologizing to him. The girl said that she did not know about the young man's serious attitude towards swordsmanship. Everyone said that he was born a weak child. Now she understood why Nox only trained endurance, and she apologized for her prejudices. The nickname of a loser has become boring for you. But in reality, you are different. And Emma said that people can make mistakes, Talia continued to say. You listen to this. Not knowing how to answer him, even during the game he noticed her honesty. Although she has the skills of a knight, Talia remains the descendant of a noble family. So it is not surprising that she has a hard time admitting when she is wrong. Nox bowed his head and asked that if the girl really thought so, then she should not tell anyone about the blood. No way, the girl answered immediately, without even thinking about her answer for a second. You thought that maybe he shouldn't worry about anyone finding out about what happened. As he was leaving her, he threw a phrase at her from behind telling her to keep her promise. The evening light illuminated her flushed face, and she looked thoughtfully at the back of Nox as he walked away. By the time the sky turned blue, the windows of the estate were glowing with artificial light. Theo sat in his office, thinking that his guesses had been correct. He approached Rudwell, asking his opinion on whether Nox was truly talented. The butler replied that he could not understand the reason why the young man gave in at the beginning of the battle, but he confirmed that among his peers, including young gentlemen, he was the best. Theo chuckled, agreeing with this conclusion, but he himself did not understand why it turned out this way. And he was sure that Nox still had many talents hidden within him that they would soon see. He gave orders to monitor every step of his youngest son, but not to take any action. Rudwell accepted the order. After what he saw today, the head of the family thought about the potential of his youngest son. He has enough talent to inherit the merciless blade of darkness. The man clenched his palm and said, and sharply told Rudwell that there was no more time. And then he added that the chief butler had been entrusted with a matter of the utmost importance. Rudwell bowed to his master and said that he would do everything in his power. You received a notification that he had completed his tutorial quest, Win the First Battle. He said that the game world had become reality, but the game system remained unchanged. He was given a reward of 3 distribution points, and the guy noted that in order to get 2 stamina points, he ran for a month without stopping. Having decided to download some statue, he opened the status window. The guy decided to invest in luck because it cannot be increased by work, and luck is also the most valuable characteristic in the game. And he decided to test her right now. You activated the advantage of the player who has completed the game 27 times and received 1 spin of the Wheel of Fortune. The guy noted with relief that the reward system also remained the same. Exhaling, he said that it was worth a try, come what may. A huge magical dispensing machine appeared in front of the guy. Yu chuckled, still not believing that he was seeing her in real life and that he was still in the game. After spinning the wheel on the machine, he said that if the luck indicator is high, the chance of catching something average or better is 95%. Simple items are not highlighted by an aura. Average items are usually highlighted in silver, and good items are highlighted in gold. But the best ones were rainbow-colored, and the guy hoped to get at least something gold. Finally, 1 ball fell out of the dispensing machine. By opening this ball, you received a golden scroll. Opening it, he found that it contained a one-time scroll of the Stormlord ability. The guy couldn't help but be happy about such a win. In the description, he noticed that a character with a lower number of overall stats than the caster would lose 20% of each stat upon use, which made him even happier. The guy noticed that there was another reward. He thought that the skill he would acquire had already been determined. He thought that in order to obtain the Reinhafer family heirloom, this skill would be very useful to him. You remembered that soon Theo would create all his sons in the estate, and that's when he would use his skill. Thinking about this, he wondered if he should return to the Reinhafer mansion already. Thinking about his second son, Garen von Reinhafer, he reflected on the fact that this year's graduation from Elden Academy had already taken place, but he might still want to live the life of a knight. However, the guy couldn't write it off, so he couldn't relax. The only thing that consoled the protagonist was that Talia would no longer be a problem. He thought that a character of this kind would never break his word. At least you thought that she wouldn't bother him anymore. But the next day, he met this girl again in one of the halls of the mansion. Folding his arms across his chest, he irritably asked her why she had come again, since they had discussed everything yesterday. Thalia began to ask him in a quiet voice to say something. Gaining confidence, she asked him louder how he had become stronger so quickly. As he passed the girl, the guy said that she should have seen it herself since she had been watching him for a whole month. Embarrassed by this remark, she asked again, saying that everything was not like that at all. Running after the guy, she began to beg him to at least fight, but then decided that she was calling so that he would not teach her. You remembered that Talia in the game longed for the recognition of her own sister. Turning to the girl, he said that she needed to do something before asking him for something like that, especially when she was asking him to train her. He told her to first realize what she was really good at. The guy fell silent, thinking about what else he needed to say because he had never consoled anyone before. Finding his words, he, a little embarrassed, told her not to compare herself to others. Talia didn't hear anything else. She just watched as Nox left the hall. The girl was a little upset when the guy just up and left. Stepping outside, Yu turned around to check that Talia would follow him. He thought about how he shouldn't let her get too close, and he wondered why he would train her at all if he was going to die by her sword. Yu headed towards the Rheinhofer stables, which had become famous throughout the area for its horses. Rudvel approached the head of the clan, bowed, greeted him and asked if he had summoned him. Turning to his children, Theo told them that they already understood why he had invited them here. He told them that they would all have to choose a faithful steed with whom they would go through countless battles. Yu tried to hide his joy because he guessed what awaited him. Horses are considered sacred creatures not only in the Rheinhofer family, but throughout the continent. If someone wants to become a magician or a knight, he needs to think in advance about the horse that he will definitely need, as almost his entire life depends on this choice. Eldine Academy, of course, teaches horse riding, which was very useful in the later stages of the game, as you can only change horses if the previous one dies. Plus, teleportation magic is too expensive to use on a regular basis. The guy thought that one way or another, horses are the only normal transport in this world, and Yu decided that he needed to try to get himself a better steed. Theo told Nox that since he had won the recent duel, he could go and choose first. The twins chuckled in displeasure at this, and the man simply told the boy that he had one try. Yu walked confidently towards the horses, and everyone was curious to see which horse he would choose. The boy walked slowly past the row of horses, thinking that they were quite cute. But then, among all the identical horses, he noticed the one he was looking for. Without further ado, he walked up to the horse and announced that he was choosing it. Everyone was surprised by the guy's choice. Theo told him that he was giving him another try. Yu was surprised by this and thought that the man was sure that this was a bad choice, which was understandable, because the horse looked weak and sickly. Yu decided to look at the status window of this mount, where it was indicated that its type was an obsidian horse, and its joint attribute was darkness. Most pets in the sea are divided into ranks, and depending on the growth potential, this rank can be leveled up. And this horse that Yu chose is quite capable of reaching the highest rank. After all, he is an obsidian horse, the rarest breed of horse in the world. The name itself is a reference to the fireproof stone. Yu thought that if Theo had known about this, he would have definitely kept this horse for himself. But then the guy immediately noticed that the horse was still sick, since most of its bonuses were limited. And this horse was dying. He had only 2 days, 16 hours, and 12 minutes left. Yu thought that it turns out there is something worse than a fatal disease. Finally, the boy confidently told his father that he had already decided to take this horse, and he thought that with his knowledge he could help this poor fellow. Theo frowned. He couldn't understand why the guy made such a strange choice. He immediately assumed that he saw a reflection of himself in this horse. Was he really just a weak-willed wimp? Without further persistence, the man replied that he hoped he would not have to regret his choice. Not wanting to take part in this any longer, the man turned around and walked away without saying goodbye. The twins called out to their father, wanting him to come back, but he didn't even give them a glance. Rudeville tried to calm them down, saying that he would oversee the choice. But Yu wondered if his father was really that angry. The butler approached Nox and asked him if he had decided what to name his steed. Crouching down to look his steed in the eye, the boy announced that his name was Carl, thinking that this was the name he had gone by in the game, so it meant a lot to him. When the selection was over, Yu dragged his steed into his room and laid him on the bed. He thought that he couldn't let his father know what he was going to do next, so hiding him in his room was the best solution. Looking into his eyes again, he noticed that Carl's eyes were full of the will to live. He thought that he was ready to fight just like his master, so that's what they would do. Yu, without thinking twice, called Rona, saying that if she didn't show up in a second, she would regret it. The girl immediately burst into the room, not letting the guy finish his threat. She asked the gentleman how he knew she was there, to which he replied that he caught her red-handed. Pointing to Carl, he ordered her to look after him. Roga was surprised that the horse was right on the bed. Pouting, she capriciously noted that she would have to wash it all off later. Yu, in response to this, only laughed and asked her how she could do this to a sick child. When the girl heard that the horse was sick, her heart immediately softened, and she said that she would do everything in her power. Yu thought that this was quite problematic, because she would be in shock when Carl recovered. But the guy was very interested in how she would react to what would happen next. 3 days later, Rona, holding the foal's head in her lap, sobbed and said that it looked like he was dead. Yu wasn't so emotional. He just thought that there were so many problems. His horse had died, and now this one was crying here. But still, he even felt a little sorry for the girl because she had been taking such good care of Carl these days. However, he was not so upset, because he knew everything from the beginning. It was inevitable. He thought that there was no way to save Carl from death. Coming closer, Yu told Roan to stop crying. It was annoying. He told her not to worry about Carl, because he would return to them. The girl, with tears in her eyes, looked at the gentleman in bewilderment and asked him if everything was all right with his head. Angry, but trying to keep a smile on his face, Yu gritted his teeth and told the girl to go away with such assumptions. To the girl's surprise, the guy took a scroll out of the inside pocket of his jacket, unfolded it, and placed it on the floor. Dropping down to the floor following the hand, he slowly poured some mana into the drawing on the scroll, and a bright light began to shine from the scroll in all directions. The light went out after a few seconds because the guy still had poor control over his mana. But Rona was still surprised, jumping to her feet. She asked the gentleman if he really knew how to do magic. Continuing to pour mana into the scroll, Yu told the maid that if she continued to distract him, then Carl would definitely help, and then it would all be her fault. Not wanting this, Rona quickly shut up, covering her mouth with her hands, and the guy continued to concentrate on his spell. Purple fire burned around the boy as he thought about how he still hadn't fully awakened the genius of magical perception characteristic. The use of magic before the age of 15 is strictly prohibited in the Empire for everyone except members of the Imperial family. So compared to their peers who are still learning to cast spells, the walls of the Imperial family will always stand at the top. The guy thought that even if he started earlier, he still can't do much. All he was capable of now was pouring his magic into the scrolls, and even that was not always successful. And while he could barely feel the energy in his own palms, that was certainly not a sign of mastery. However, this was all the mana he had at the moment, and the guy was determined to use it to its full potential now. He chuckled and thought that he only had one chance to activate this scroll. He simply had no right to make a mistake, and the magic he was going to master was black magic, namely the Book of the Dead spell. The violent energy from the scroll took the form of a bony hand, which lay on a thick book. A notification appeared that the target of the appearance spell was Carl. He would be resurrected as a living dead. In the Thing of Me, there are only 2 types of dead creatures that can be raised. The first are the higher undead, who retain their sanity and are capable of dark magic. The second ones are ordinary faceless undead, deprived of both a soul and physical defects from life. The guy thought that such creatures were blindly black only to the necromancer who summoned them. However, there is one caveat. The only family in this world that is involved in summoning the dead is the Marvis clan, whose attribute is darkness. Reinhafers also have the darkness attribute, but they are mostly knights, while Marvis are black magicians who control their own undead. However, this does not mean that anyone who does not belong to the Marvis clan does not have the right to use their magic. All you need to do this is get hold of the Necronomicon, also known as the Book of the Dead. Suddenly, dark magical hands emerged from the magic circle on the floor. The scroll's energy turned from bright purple to almost black, and magical dark hands reached out to the target of the spell, Carl. She began to hug him, as if wanting to take him back to where they had come from. Meanwhile, mana was leaking out of Nox's body very quickly, which had a bad effect on him. A thin stream of blood began to flow from the guy's mouth. Noticing something strange about the gentleman, Rona, who had been watching him all this time, called out to him with concern. But despite the diminishing capabilities of his new body, Yu continued to use the spell, and this time blood came out of his throat with a cough. The energy that emanated from under his hands began to slowly drain away, just as his mana was running out. However, the spell had already begun to work on Carl, transforming him beyond recognition. A notification appeared indicating that the transformation had been successful, and Yu glanced up, almost losing consciousness. Breathing heavily, Yu, covered in cold sweat, smiled weakly. He happily thought that he had succeeded after all. When it was all over, Rona still dared to say something and turned to the young master. Slowly getting to his feet, the guy, wiping the blood from his face, told her with a smile that Carl was with them again. He walked up to his dispatched mount, whose eyes and hair were now shining. All the bonuses that had previously been locked were unlocked, and his rank had increased. The death restriction was lifted, but the duration of the transformation was only for a year. The creature progressed 1.5 times faster than others, and it could be summoned and cut off with mana. Touched Carl, Yu told him that he was now his master. And then Rona suddenly pounced on her master and Carl with hugs, practically knocking them off their feet. The guy, not expecting this, asked the maid what she was doing, but he still did not push her away. The girl burst into tears and asked the guy how he could use all his mana so recklessly. She said that she was very worried. She asked Carl how he could do this to her, and she asked both of them whether they had thought about her. Carl closed his eyes in shame, and the girl exclaimed that she cared about him so much, and he did this. She told him that he had given her all the carrots that she had spent on him, and the horse merely snorted in response. Smiling at the sight, Yu thought that he was now one step closer to his true goal. A few days later, under cover of night, Yu quietly left his chambers and went somewhere, avoiding security. Looking at the map he took with him, he noticed that even the expensive ones were the same as they were in the game. As it turned out, the guy was heading for another Reinhofer artifact, which he had to get at any cost. The whole point is that this item could compensate for his fatal illness. Hearing some rustling to the side, the guy immediately turned towards the sound, his hand reaching for the sword on his belt. But when he turned around, he saw nothing strange, only a sign with the name of the forest he was going to enter. Yu thought that for him this world was more of a game. It was now the real world, so he wouldn't want to die here. The guy entered Mia's forest and was given a notification that an unsuccessful attempt could result in death. Mia's forest is a forbidden forest in the Reinhofer territory. No matter how experienced a person is a traveler or tracker, anyone can easily get lost in the impenetrable darkness of the fog in this forest. They also say that this forest is cursed. Here you become helpless, like a child. Yu also remembered that there was one unpleasant nuance in passing this location. The catch was that every time you kill a monster, it doesn't drop anything. You remembered the monsters being difficult, and he even shuddered at the memory of how often he died here in the game. However, the guy smiled and remembered that the forest difficulty was rated at 2.5 stars on a 5-star scale. When he played the game, he tried his best to get through this place, but the reward disappointed him. But now, ironically, this artifact is absolutely vital for him. Yu wrapped some cloth around a branch he picked up from the ground, making himself a torch. He lit this torch to light his way ahead, as a strong wind blew into his face from the depths of the forest. The guy explained that the main key to getting through Mia's forest was the direction in which the smoke was coming. More precisely, to cross this territory, it was necessary to go against the direction of the smoke. But before going any further, he decided to sort something out. Taking hold of his sword, he turned around and shouted for whoever was there to stop wandering around the bushes. However, even after that, no one came out. Yu sighed and said that it looked like he would pretend until the very end that he was not here. The boy gripped the sword more tightly and swung it towards the bushes, cutting through the branches. A few hours before, Thalia had been sitting by the window saying she couldn't believe that Beauty was so useless against him. She pouted and said she didn't understand anything. Emma again asked her mistress to stop pursuing young Master Nox. She noted with concern that if something happened, she would be the first to get it. Thalia, smiling, reassured the maid, saying that even if she cut off this guy's balls, nothing would happen to her. As the night drew closer, Emma walked towards her mistress's chambers, thinking that she had been such a smart girl before. She thought that if it weren't for the Shelley gentleman, she could very well become the head of the family in the future. However, recently her character has completely deteriorated. Is it all because she is in her sister's shadow? Opening the doors to her mistress's chambers, Emma entered, hoping that the girl had followed her advice and was already seeing sweet dreams. But looking around the room, she did not notice Thalia's presence. Suspecting something was wrong, Emma immediately became worried, her hands shaking with fear. She immediately went to wake up everyone in the mansion, hoping that the gentleman had not gone to spy on the young master again. But Emma's worst fears came true, and Thalia was indeed next to Nox, who hadn't discovered her. The girl stood up to greet the guy, but he interrupted her, asking what she was doing there. The girl didn't have time to answer him because suddenly the guy came out in front of her, holding out a torch in front. A gray wolf emerged from the fog with a quiet growl, drool flowing from its mouth and its eyes flickering with a bright yellow light. Thalia wondered if there were gray wolves in this forest, and she immediately noticed that she didn't even have a blade with her. While Yu held the girl close to him to protect her, the wolf began to slowly walk around the couple, and after a few seconds, raising his muzzle, the gray wolf began to howl loudly, calling to his relatives. Following this, the wolf rushed at the guy, but he was ready for this. He quickly lunged forward, striking with his sword. The wolf, struck by the blow, fell dead to the ground, causing Thalia to flinch. But then the girl's eyes lit up as she thought with admiration that Nox, even unarmed, had dealt with such a huge wolf. There was a splash of blood on the guy's face, and he asked the girl again what she was doing there, saying that he thought the brothers were following him. Awkwardly twirling a strand of hair around her finger, Thalia tried to lie, saying she was lost. In response to this, the guy said that he was a unicorn then, and he asked her if she really wanted him to leave her here alone. Excited, Thalia began babbling quickly about how she was just wondering how he was so strong, and today she noticed that he was going somewhere, so she decided to follow. You thought that there were 3 conclusions that could be drawn from all of this. The first is that Thalia thinks too highly of him. The second is that she didn't mean any harm, which is a relief. And thirdly, she is a child whose mother clearly did not teach her that it is somewhat dangerous to follow someone into the forest at night. He sighed and thought that he couldn't leave here either, since he was the main character after all, and he told her that she could go with him. But then he seriously told her that first they needed to clarify something. You told her that he would not help her become stronger, he just did not want anything to happen to her, and all the blame would fall on his family. The girl apologized in frustration for doing nothing but bothering him. Glancing over his shoulder at Thalia, the boy wondered if she was really getting it. The girl looked away shyly and thanked the guy. But before she could say anything else, many pairs of eyes began to shine in the shadows of the trees. The wolves slowly came out into the open area, surrounding the couple from all sides. Frightened, Thalia pressed herself against the guy again, but then Yu walked away from the girl, telling her to stay away from him. Without turning around, he told her that he might accidentally hit her when he swung. Looking around, the guy thought that there were too many wolves here, so he needed to concentrate. He remembered that this forest is passed through before the events of the main scenario, so, in essence, it is a prologue area. So there are no bosses here, but that doesn't mean it's safer. After all, there is an elite monster here that is not much weaker than the boss. This monster is a more advanced type of wolf than the one he has already killed, namely the elite gray wolf. The wolves, growling quietly, slowly approached the people. Yu thought that his knowledge of the enemy did not give him any guarantees of victory. A moment later, the vodkas rushed forward and pounced on the guy, but he met them with swings of his sword. However, behind these wolves there were already their comrades, and the boy thought that sometimes it might turn out that he would be driven into a corner. The death of their comrades did not frighten the wolves, and they again began to attack the enemy. In such a situation, Yu repeats to himself what happened when he was still Yu-chan. During the times of sucking in the inner sleepwalker, grasping the sword with both hands, the boy deftly turned it around. Swinging his sword with even greater force, striking several wolves at once, the boy told himself to pull himself together. Holding the torch in her hands, Thalia watched Nox in amazement, thinking that she was sure that this was not all he was capable of, because during the fight with his brothers he had demonstrated a technique a level higher than his current one. Looking at the wolf's corpse, the girl wondered if he had killed wolves before. The girl's gaze fell on the torch in her hands, and the guy's words about her staying away sounded in her head. She thought sadly that Nox himself thought she was just a burden to him. When it seemed that everything had become quiet and the wolf attacks had ended, somewhere in the depths, rustling and footsteps were heard again. An elite gray wolf surrounded by ordinary gray wolves emerged from the forest into the clearing. Meanwhile, the estate's servants walked around the grounds, trying to find Milady Thalia and young Master Nox. One of the servants made 2 sets of small footprints on the ground, and he said that they definitely belonged to Master Nox and Lady Thalia. The man asked fearfully if the young gentleman had really gone into Mia's forest, and Lady Thalia with him. Hearing this, Emma lost strength in her legs out of fear and fell to the ground. She began to ask excitedly what they should do and exclaimed that they needed to get them back quickly. Rudville appeared. He calmly told Emma not to talk nonsense. It was impossible. Looking at the butler, she, still unable to control her emotions, asked why. Rudville answered that it was because even the Rheinhafers had not fully explored this forest. It is considered a high-risk location, even though the Rheinhafers are considered the strongest in the south. But the fact remains, there is an area on their land that is still strictly off-limits, and if this becomes public knowledge, rumors will spread about the incompetence of the gentleman. The man wondered why the young gentleman had gone there at all. He thought that the only explanation was that he was possessed after all. Looking at the tracks on the ground, he noticed that he was sneaking. He noted that there was no indication that any outsider could have overcome the family's magical barrier. From all this, he concluded that Mr. Knox had gone into this forest of his own free will and nothing else. Rudwell thought that he had been wrong after all. There was no longer any point in denying that Knox was no longer the weak and fragile young man he had known. The man said that they had only one thing to do: wait for their return. He said that he hoped that the young gentleman would have enough sense not to get lost there and get out of the forest alive. Emma no longer tried to convince the man, but just looked into the forest with her eyes full of tears. Having cried even more than before, she already assumed the worst, that the lady would not return and would not be blamed for her death. Meanwhile, Thalia, drawing her sword from the sheath on her ankle, held it forward. You noticed that even though she was scared, she maintained her composure, and he told her not to attack unnecessarily and to stick with him, as he didn't want her to get hurt. And he also told her to save her strength, so that if something went wrong, she could run back to the estate with all her might. The guy told her that this was the only way she would have a chance of surviving. Looking at the wolves that were already standing in front of them, the guy decided that an elite wolf was not such a formidable opponent after all. You just wanted Talia to stay alert and react in time if something happened. Looking at the calm and collected lady, he thought that she was not the main character for nothing, but he still could not trust her with his back. Having activated the Hour of Genius, you thought that for now, this would be enough for him to win. But then the elite gray wolf just lay down on the ground, not intending to attack himself, which made the guy quite angry. One of the normal wolves quickly ran forward to attack the guy, but he was already prepared to meet the blow and struck with his sword. Seeing how you easily dealt with their fellow wolves, the other wolves shuddered and froze. But then the elite gray wolf gave a quiet growl, and the other wolves, as if obeying a command, all rushed forward at once. One of the wolves was about to attack the guy from behind, but before he could touch him, a dagger flew into his neck. As it turned out, this dagger was skillfully thrown by Thalia, who in the meantime had climbed a tree. She looked down at the wolves clawing at the tree, trying to get her. The girl thought that Knox had told her to leave, but she couldn't do that. You, in turn, was surprised that Thalia, at whose hands he was supposed to die, helped him. Still sitting in the tree, Thalia asked the guy how he was. She asked him worriedly if he was hurt. The guy was even more surprised than before that this girl was worried about him. But he couldn't relax, because the wolf immediately attacked him again, but guided by his reflexes, he fought off the attack with his sword. Having dealt with the wolf, you answered the girl that he was fine, thinking that in any case now was not the time to care about him. Thalia sighed in relief, noting that this was good. You thought bitterly that he was again showing how weak he was. Then he noticed that his hands were starting to shake slightly, which meant that the recoil was slowly starting to get in the way. Having weakened his opponent, the elite gray wolf nevertheless decided to take matters into his own paws. Noticing that his main opponent was about to engage in battle, you chuckled and thought that the fun was just beginning. But instead of attacking the guy, the elite gray wolf ran past him. The wolf ran behind the boy and attacked him, but he didn't have time to dodge, causing the enemy's claws to hit his shoulder. Having made his cunning attack, the wolf did not make another one, but ran into the bushes. Squeezing his bloody shoulder to stop the bleeding, you thought that this wasn't 2.5 stars. An elite gray wolf hid in the bushes, and the boy thought that this wolf cub was much smarter than he had been in the game. Looking around to make sure he didn't miss the next attack, he thought that he could have figured this out from the way he controlled the pack, but he never thought that he would use the terrain as well. A rustling sound was heard somewhere to the side in the bushes, and you immediately turned around, thinking that he needed to pay more attention to defense. The wolf emerged from the bushes, and the panel meanwhile struck, but missed the enemy because he managed to break in time. To the boy's surprise, the wolf seemed to be expecting his attack. It opened its mouth and growled. Gripping his sword tighter, you thought that the wolf cub had been deliberately waiting for him to open up by swinging too wide. The recoil began to affect his condition more than before, causing him to practically lose consciousness. But the wolf didn't think to wait and rushed again. The guy thought that he had screwed up. He was too carried away by the idea that this was just a game that he knew well. Frozen by the recoil and hopelessness, he thought that he had been a naive fool to think that he could simply cope with everything. But the wolf did not attack. He was knocked off course by a dagger that flew straight into his eye. This made you realize that not only was he open in many ways, but the wolf was also unable to take advantage of this. Without delay, the boy quickly pierced the elite gray wolf with his sword. The wolf howled loudly in pain, but he could not move to strike again. With the sword in his chest, he fell dead to the ground, blood flowing across the grass, and you, breathing heavily, sank to the ground. When the leader of the pack was defeated, the other, weaker wolves immediately ran away. Thalia quickly climbed down from the tree and ran up to the guy, asking him if he was okay. Wiping the blood from his face, he said he was fine, and almost said that he survived only thanks to her, but stopped himself in time. He wondered with surprise if he had just almost thanked his future killer. Taking on a cold expression, Yu looked away and told the girl that she shouldn't have interfered. Thalia looked at the guy and noticed a wound on his shoulder. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she asked him how he could say that everything was okay. Rising to his feet and taking the torch from the girl's hands, the guy replied that it was just a scratch. Having calmed down a little, Thalia smiled and remarked that it was good that there was no more serious damage. And in the meantime, a spider landed next to her. Noticing a spider next to her, the girl screamed and rushed towards Nox. Pressing herself against the guy, she quietly said that there was a spider there. Noticing the spider on her shoulder, she pulled back again, but did not let go of the guy from her embrace. This scene made the guy grin. He wondered if the great heroine was really afraid of a small spider. Shaking the spider off her shoulder, Yu asked why she followed him into the forest, if such trifles frightened her. Thalia couldn't find an excuse. She asked sheepishly if spiders weren't scary. The guy only laughed in response and remarked that she was a lousy knight back then. Thalia screamed indignantly that everything was wrong, and B was finally able to get out of her tight grip. But then he burst into a coughing fit, causing his whole body to shake and his legs to give way. The girl again asked him worriedly if he was okay. Standing up straight, Yu thought that this was a 5-point return, but he told Thalia once again that everything was fine with him. He thought that this time Thalia had outdone herself. Smiling, he said, albeit to himself, that he survived thanks to her, but he didn't have time to say it because she started screaming so suddenly. While the girl continued to worry about him, he thought that he was truly grateful to her. Meanwhile, the sun had already begun to rise over the horizon, illuminating the previously dark forest. Emma continued to sob, saying under her breath that it was her fault that her mistress died. She kept wondering why they didn't go looking for her. She couldn't understand this, because the disappearance of Lady Talia would create many problems for both families. Rudwell thought that, given how many children had disappeared from that damned forest of Mia, rumors of the Rheinhafer's incompetence seemed inevitable. But then someone called out to the butler, urging him to look ahead. To everyone's surprise, the fog over the forest began to clear, causing the light to shine brightly above the trees. Rising to her feet, Emma asked Rudwell if she understood correctly what was happening now, because such flashes of mana spoke of one thing. The man replied that she understood everything correctly. The forest was no longer dangerous. Everyone was eagerly waiting to see what would happen next, whether their masters would return, but the butler said that their hopes were justified. And then the Nox came out of the forest and Lady Talia followed them. The servants couldn't believe that these two were able to clear this forest, and some were confused by the indifferent face with which Nox came out. Rudwell couldn't help but smile at the sight of the young gentleman, but he raised his hand to cover it. He thought that the order of succession of the Rheinhafer family would soon change. Approaching the crowd, Nox indignantly asked what all this pandemonium was about. Emma rushed to embrace her mistress with tears, and Rudwell told the young master that he had disappeared without saying a word, so they were, of course, all worried. Yu didn't really believe it, and asked whether the family really cared about such an incompetent person, whether they were really afraid for their reputation. Emma grabbed her mistress and sternly told her that she needed to be reminded of the Steele family rules. Realizing that nothing good awaited her, Thalia humbly begged for mercy. Squeezing her hand tighter, Emma said with a forced smile that she did not dare to educate her mistress, so the head of the family would personally take care of her. Seeing this, Yu thought that it wasn't just his maid who was unique. Having finished with Talia, the maid approached Nox and thanked him for returning her mistress safe and sound. The girl apologized to the guy again, saying that she shouldn't have followed him. But then Yu told her that she did a great job, so she didn't need to beat herself up so much. After some time, the guy returned to his quarters, throwing his things on the chair. He said that he never expected that Rudwell and the knights would be waiting for them at the edge of the forest. He noted that it was very awkward. But the most important thing is that he was able to get the artifact. Yu took a small dark ring out of his trouser pocket. The black flame ring had the darkness attribute and added +1 to stamina and +1 to mana. This ring also had a special effect. Upon defeating an enemy, the wearer was given the opportunity to take a small portion of the enemy's life force, thus increasing the wearer's lifespan, and the higher the target's rank, the more life force could be drained. Yu thought that this was the only artifact in the game that gave such an opportunity. However, even with such a ring, the guy would not be able to achieve immortality, and all because this ring had a limit. It is only possible to steal a small portion of life force, and this, of course, is not enough to overcome a fatal disease. The guy put the ring on his finger, equipping it, and thought that it would, however, help at least a little for a long time. He reasoned with a smile that anything was better than living in eternal anticipation of death. As soon as he put on the ring, Yu immediately felt his vitality and mana increase. Turning his head towards the door, the boy called out to Rona, shouting that he knew she was there. Looking into the room from behind the door, the girl asked the gentleman if he could really see through the walls. Deciding to play along with her, Yu, after a short silence, replied that anything was possible. Rona blushed in response and asked him if he was spying on naked women. The angry guy hit the maid on the head and asked her what she was talking about. Holding her bruised head, Rona pouted and told the gentleman that his flicks were so hard. Sitting down at the table, Yu called the girl over to compete with him in arm wrestling again. After sitting down, Rona said that if she won again, he would have to increase her salary, and the guy said that if she lost, he would reduce it by 20%. Not even a second had passed since the start of the fight when the guy had already won, pinning the maid's hand to the table. Realizing that she had lost, Rona jumped up, saying that he couldn't take the last money from the maid, otherwise the glorious reputation of the Reinhofer family would be undermined. Waving his hand, Yu replied that maybe that was the case, but he said that he was already a disgrace to his family, if the rumors were to be believed. Smiling, he said that he had no need to worry about any reputation, and Rona began to beg him for mercy. But then, when Yu rested his chin on his hand, he felt a strong pain, as if he had put a weight there instead of his head. One after another, restrictions rained down on him in the form of illness, wrist inflammation, and cold. Yu told the girl that he would leave her not his old salary, and asked her to bring him some ice in a basin with a wet towel. Rona asked the gentleman if he had really become ill. Indeed, feeling unwell after being subjected to so many restrictions, Yu thought that he would have to make do with the new ring for now. But for now, he needed rest. Thus, Yu received a couple of advantages in the form of a ring of black flame and a horse named Carl. It's been 6 months since the guy received them, but unfortunately he still hasn't had the chance to try them out. The whole point was that he was put under house arrest. Yu indignantly said that he hadn't caused any problems for anyone, so why should he do this? He would still credit them with the forest, and what did he get instead of gratitude? Turning around, he asked Rona, out of support, if she agreed with him. The girl looked away and said that she was just a servant, and then quietly added that she could lose her salary if she spoke badly about the head's decision. Finding no support, Yu told her that he would cut it off himself if she contradicted him, and she should remember this. And Rona truly agreed with the guy that his father was too strict. Falling into a chair, the guy sighed and thought that he had tried so hard to adapt to this life, and now all that was left for him was to sit here, watching Carl's funny behavior. He thought that this could not continue, because with every minute his life was getting shorter. The character had only 147 days left to live. Seeing this notification about his lifespan, Yu thought angrily that even the damn system knew more about his life than he did. Rising abruptly from his chair, Yu exclaimed that he couldn't bear it any longer, so he would go straight to his father and demand that he be released. From behind the door, Rona was indignant that she had just gone to heat some water for his bath, when suddenly there was a knock on the door. Rudwell entered Knox's room, bowed respectfully and told the young master that the head of the family was calling him to see him. In the distant past, Tell Reinhofer took part in the night of the Great Massacre. Hordes of demons descended upon him when he was left alone to fight against them. Theo sat in his office, indulging in these memories with his eyes closed. He thought again that one day one of his sons would inherit the despotic blade of darkness. However, the man could not give it to just an outstanding heir. He needed the best because he would have to kill him. Theo was pulled out of his thoughts by Rudwell, who entered the office, informing the head of the family that the youngest son would soon be arriving. Theo shouted at the guy not to keep him waiting and to go faster. He thought that even he himself did not want to go into this forest, but Knox just went there and enrolled him overnight, which definitely deserves a reward. Theo did not reward his son immediately due to a series of protests from their vassals. The whole point is that they simply did not believe that this was done by the most incompetent son of the family and demanded proof of the forest being cleared, as well as a thorough investigation. As the head of the family, Theo couldn't just ignore them, so an investigation was necessary. A few minutes later, Yu entered the office. He bowed to the head of the family and greeted him. The man allowed him to stand up, and he immediately straightened his back. Theo told his son that he hoped he had realized by now how wrong he had been in his willfulness, and the boy said that he had. The man continued by saying that, one way or another, his job as the head of the family was to give credit to those who truly deserved it. So he had called him here to discuss the reward. Hearing this, the guy said that he had just one request. Theo smiled and replied that he was ready to listen and do everything if it was within his capabilities. Yu hesitated. He could not believe that the head of the family would fulfill any of his wishes. It was the first time he had heard of Theo Reinhofer handing out rewards, even considering how much time he had spent in the game. The man had always been known as a stern and stingy character. You thought suspiciously about the fact that he had a feeling that he was about to be stabbed in the back. To calm his doubts, he decided to ask the man again whether he would do anything. Getting to his feet, the head of the family replied that he would give him everything he wanted. Swearing by the glorious history of the Dark Blade, he gave it his word that he would provide it with whatever it asked for. Hearing this, you noticed that Theo was saying this seriously, even though he thought he was joking. Theo told his son that if he asked for something absurd, his opinion of him would not fall much, and he asked him not to do anything stupid. You agreed with this and asked for time to think. The head of the family did not resist and said that his house arrest had been lifted. He said he hoped he wouldn't cause trouble like the recent ones, and you replied that it wouldn't happen again. Finally, the man told his son that he should henceforth behave as befits a member of the Reinhofer family. The next day, you went out to see Thalia, off as she was about to leave the estate. The girl told the guy with a smile that she couldn't wait to see them at Eldon Academy. The guy just turned away, not wanting to say anything, and Talia persistently asked him if they would see each other again. Rudwell told the young gentleman that when a lady asks a question, it is proper to answer, and the boy had no choice but to bid her farewell. But he still told her that they would see each other again only if she became a real knight. Talia, determined to learn from the best, asked what a real knight was like. The guy replied that he was a knight who did not retreat in the face of danger, including even the largest spiders in the world. In response to this, the girl punched the guy hard in the stomach, and he thought that he should have said, "Wolves." He touched his stomach where the girl had removed it, thinking that he shouldn't have mentioned her phobia. Thalia exclaimed that she would become a real knight by their next meeting, so he should prepare his head in advance. His stomach was still throbbing with pain, and you, frightened, wondered if she really wanted to rip his head off. Emma approached the young master to thank him. The guy asked her why the maid of the Stillane family would thank him. The woman replied with a smile that it was he who had returned Lady Talia safe and sound. Yu sighed and said that he didn't do it on purpose, and that it wasn't his fault at all. He told them to leave quickly because he had a lot of things to do. Talia and Emma got into the quarry and drove away. Watching the carriage move away, Yu thought with relief that they had finally left. And then he began to think about the fact that he was gradually getting used to this paradoxical life. He smiled and thought that he didn't know why, but he really liked it here. However, the days of life that remained to Yu passed very quickly, so he had 140 days left, which made the guy tense. The only thing that made him happy was that he was progressing quite quickly, despite all his limitations. He thought that there was not much time left before he would be accepted into the academy. While folding the laundry, Rona happily exclaimed that classes at the academy would start in a couple of months. She asked the gentleman if he was nervous. Yu didn't answer, but only asked the girl if she was still happy that he would soon be moving to the dorm. Rona screamed indignantly that she would actually miss him, that she couldn't even shed tears at the thought. The guy told her she was overdoing it and asked her if she was really that worried about her salary, and he hit the nail on the head. Yu thought that soon he would not have time for her for the next 2 months. He needed to at least raise his stats a little. Otherwise, it would be extremely difficult to survive within the walls of the academy. Eldine, the Empire's finest academy, accepts only the most worthy. You still had to survive among these worthy ones and join the main plot as the villain Nox Reinhofer. The guy clicked his tongue, thinking about how complicated it all was. Here, Rona told the gentleman that he was supposed to be assigned a new servant. Yu was surprised by this news, but after thinking about it, he realized that it wasn't so bad. Rudville entered the chambers. He bowed to the young master, and he asked the man what was the matter. Waving his hand at the girl behind him, the butler said that a new maid had been assigned especially for him at the Eldon Academy. He said that from today on she would be serving him, so he should try to get used to her. The green-haired girl in the standard maid outfit curtsied as she greeted the new master. She said that it was a great honor for her to serve him, and she said that her name was not Chitri de Louvier. After a brief silence, Yu said that his name was Nox von Reinhofer. Hearing a name familiar from the game, the guy decided to look at the statistics of the new maid. And then the active bonus, loyalty to the owner, caught his eye, and the owner was listed as Theo Reinhofer. And with this bonus, Chitri was spying on the player on the orders of the owner. Smiling, Chitri told the boy that she promised to serve him with all her devotion, and Yu thought that he knew that they wouldn't leave him alone so easily. Theo Reinhofer is one of the game's villains, and also one of the strongest in the world. If we ask ourselves how he came to his position, it becomes obvious that swordsmanship alone was not enough, although that is certainly true. However, the main reason why Tell Reinhofer eventually took over the family was the fact that he was always wary of his inner circle. The day before Chitri met Nox, Theo told her that he didn't expect much. Without raising her empty eyes from the floor, the girl replied that she would not let him down. The man told her that he knew Louvier had been relegated to the back seat in the line of succession, but that if she succeeded, the Reinhofer family would provide her with all possible support. The girl began to say that she would serve young Master Nox faithfully, but Theo did not interrupt, saying that this was not it. Looking up, Chitri saw the man looking at her menacingly. She immediately hastened to correct herself and said that she would keep a close eye on him. She said that she would report even the most insignificant detail about him. Before Chitri left the office, Theo told her not to forget who she really served. Standing behind the door, the girl opened her locket with a photograph of her family and told herself that she would not hesitate anymore. Yu, lying in his bed, thought that since Tell sent a spy to him, it meant that he still didn't trust him. He realized that the man still needed confirmation that he was still Nox. But for the guy, this was expected, given that cases of possession in the Thing to Me are not uncommon. And Nox in the original was just the character possessed by the #1 demon, Baal. Sitting up on the bed, the guy exhaled and thought that everything was fine as long as Theo didn't know anything. However, Chitri was a problem for him, no matter how you looked at it. On the one hand, Chitri de Louvier is only a minor character. But on the other hand, she has potential because she was supposed to become the next head of the Louvier family. However, it was not her parents who were brutally killed by her uncle, as a result of which she lost her position. And then everything is obvious. She becomes the Reinhofer's maid only to make a home out of it. On the outside, she's all happy and positive, but on the inside, she's quite rotten and on the verge of self-destruction. Yu thought sadly that the last thing he knew about her from the game was something that happened before the start of the main story. Namely, Chitri de Louvier will commit suicide and nothing more is known about her. Yu wondered if he should do something about it. He began to think about what would happen if he entered the main story and saved the life of the one who was supposed to die. He was tormented by the question of whether this would be the right decision or whether he would only tighten the noose around his neck along with hers. The next day, Yu announced to his maids, Rona and Chitri, that from that day on, he was going to hunt monsters in the forest every day. And he said that he would, of course, need an escort. And Rona, in response to this, became indignant and began to question the owner. Frightened by the hunt in that very cursed forest, the girl said that she was not feeling well today, and she asked if she could go another time. Chitri, unlike the other girl, agreed without hesitation. Grabbing the girl's hand, Rona told her not to blindly agree to everything. Yu thought that any normal maid would be frightened by such a statement, since it was beyond their competence. The guy noticed Chitri's shaking hands and that she still agreed without thinking. Laughing, Yu told Rona that she always gets over herself with him. He told her to get it together because he wouldn't give her a day off, and the girl recoiled and asked how he could do this to her. In response, the guy asked her if she remembered their last conversation about reputation and said that her salary was still in his hands, and he had already been too kind to her. Rona burst into tears and realized she had no choice, and asked whether she should take a sword or a bow with her. In the midst of this chaos, Chitri's even voice was heard calling out to the young master. She asked him with a polite smile if she could tell Rudwell that they were going out. Remembering that Chitri was a spy, Yu thought that for now his priority was to extend his lifespan, and the boy and his maids quickly rode their horses into the forest. Theo watched this from the window of his office. A few days after Mia's forest was cleared, it began to resemble a normal forest. Day after day, Yu came to the forest, chopped down wolves, and used the ring to steal a small amount of their life force. For each of the wolves, he received an increase in life expectancy in the amount of 2 hours. Looking around, the boy noticed that he should have already killed all the wolves in this part of the forest. He reasoned that if he got 2 hours of life for each of them, it could be called a fairly successful hunt. Chitri, having given the gentleman a flask of water, asked him if he was tired, since he had already been hunting for an hour. Hearing how much time had passed, Yu thought sadly that without the hour of genius, the hunt was going too slowly. Taking the flask from the girl's hands, he thought that he was barely making up for the hour of his life spent hunting. After taking a sip, the guy thought that he knew that dreaming about balance was stupid, but it simply wouldn't do any good. He couldn't hunt every damn hour. But what worried him most was the limited number of monsters. Since he had been hunting almost non-stop for the past few days, the number of monsters had dropped significantly. Yu thought that at this rate, his plan to extend his life was doomed to failure. He sighed and muttered that the lack of monsters in the area was a problem, and Chitri had already handed him a towel. The girl asked him if he was serious and remarked that if others heard him, they would think he was delirious. Noticing that the sun was already beginning to set, the guy said that there was nothing to be done and it was time to return to the estate. Chitri helpfully asked him if she should prepare a bath for him upon his return and said she knew how to get the most suitable temperature. Thinking that this was what one would expect from a service genius, the guy agreed, saying that he wanted to take a bath before dinner, so she should hurry. Smiling, Chitri said that he could trust her, she would not let him down. Rona intervened in the conversation. She exclaimed that the master should not forget about her. She was actually the best at cleaning. Noticing the competition, the girl began actively collecting things to prove that she was also useful. Chitri watched the girl with a smile, also packing her things. Her task was interrupted by Yu, who called the girl, and she immediately responded. He said thoughtfully that he wanted to ask about something else. When the girl agreed, he asked her who she worked for. Hearing this question, Chitri also froze. The sparkle in her eyes faded, and she asked again. The girl hesitated with her answer, and Yu thought that no matter how good your sword is, if you can't wield it, then it's better to get rid of it quickly. The guy, noticing the girl's strange behavior, asked her if she really didn't want to answer. Chitri realized that she couldn't remain silent, and she tried to say at least something, even asked permission to justify herself. Having collected her thoughts, she began to speak, but the guy interrupted her, saying that he knew what she was about to say. He told her not to worry because he was not going to interrogate her harshly. He said he was even grateful, because at least she wasn't trying to deny it, and Chitri shuddered. Yu told her that it didn't matter who she served as long as she carried out his orders. As he passed by the girl, he told her that she could also use it if she needed it. The girl didn't say anything after him. She just looked at his back while he thought about the fact that trust was useless. He thought that mutual benefit is much more important than any kind of trust. He thought that this type of relationship would be much more effective than others. As the night approached, Rona returned to her room and began to complain to the gentleman, asking if he was overdoing it. She noticed that he literally said that if she didn't run with him, he wouldn't have as much fun training. She asked Chitri if it wasn't too much. She just smiled politely and reluctantly agreed. Chitri, turning away, thought that the servants about how much the young master had changed had reached the Louvier estate. At the time, she thought that she was exaggerating, since it is unusual for a person to change to such an extent. However, the way he defeated the twins in one go and took his place in the academy was very different. Chitri thought that these were definitely attempts to strengthen her position in her own family. She thought that the gentleman was the complete opposite of her, who had lost everything, being the legitimate heir of the family. Clutching the medallion to her chest, she remembered the words he had said earlier. The girl couldn't understand what he meant. Sometime later, a baseless rumor began to spread in the Reinhofer mansion. The rumor is that Chitri was kicked out of the house, which means she has no right to serve such noble persons as the Reinhofers. Chitri clutched the letter in which her uncle wrote to her that she did not deserve the position of head of the house, and that she would pay in full for trading her family for her own interests. The letter stated that from now on she was deprived of her rights as a legal heir, as well as all the other ghosts she had. The girl thought that it looked like she wouldn't be allowed to stay with the Reinhofers for long. She thought that this was expected, because the Reinhofers were too noble after all, a race of darkness. Even to serve the most inferior son of this family, one must be an aristocrat, and since she is now a commoner, she does not even have the right to be nearby. As she left the room, she already understood for sure that they would get rid of her very soon. Walking down the corridor, she wondered what would happen to her next. Opening the door, Chitri entered the kitchen and greeted the other maids with a smile. However, all the maids immediately fell silent and turned to look at her with strange expressions on their faces. And then Chitri realized that they were definitely already aware of the rumors. Sighing, she thought that it was nothing. She had long since gotten used to looks full of contempt. But then Rona came running at her from behind. She joyfully exclaimed that she had finally found her and told her to come with her. Seeing that there was not a drop of contempt or pity in Rona's gaze, Chitri wondered if she hadn't heard the rumors yet. But then the girl grabbed him by the hand, and Chitri wondered if she really wanted to help her as a friend. Rona pulled the girl along with her, while she thought that in any case, what she was doing was extremely reckless. She thought sadly that she, Rona, and young Master Nox were all acting stupidly. Sitting in his room, Yu thought that everything would soon end. After reading the letter, he thought that it was not only he and Chitri who received it. Theo received it too. The guy was sure that all the crimes that Chitri's father was accused of were set up. However, he thought that he too was not sure that he could help her in any way. The thing was, he couldn't predict how the butterfly effect would affect him if he tried to save her life. In the following days, You continued to give birth to the forest by killing the monsters that were still left. Rona asked Chitri if she thought the young master looked tougher than usual today. She noticed that in the past he had been more merciful. Rona tried to find a word to describe how she felt about the gentleman today, but she couldn't find the words. Chitri asked her with interest what she wanted to say. Looking back at the gentleman, she thought that this was what was making her uneasy. While chopping up the wolves without much emotion, Yu was thinking about one thing: whether he would show up today or not. The thing is that there is a monster living in Mia's forest that can randomly appear in any part of the forest if the total number of monsters has dropped to 20% of the total. The guy was really eager to kill this hidden boss, as it would really help raise his stats. He had already decided that today this was a lost cause, when suddenly something flew before his eyes. Yu tried to stop the blow with his sword, but its speed was on another level. Then he smiled, realizing that the secret boss had finally shown up. And this secret boss was not some even cooler wolf, but an elite king of wasps. Yu thought that this boss was a real problem, but he could handle him. But then, before the sting of the wasp king hit the guy, Chitri jumped out in front of him. Sharp blows pierced the girl's chest, and the guy thought that he could dodge or block, but he could not understand why she decided to help. He couldn't understand why she stood up for him. He wondered if there were other people in the world who were so reckless that they would also jump out at a terrible monster for the sake of their master. Yu decided that Chitri could still serve him well, so he should use it. Meanwhile, Chitri involuntarily recalled her childhood, how she cried in front of her parents when she got hurt. Her parents were always grumbling that she wasn't letting her punks live their lives properly. Unfortunately, this concerned not only the wounds on her knees, but also her mental wounds. Chitri, remembering Nox's question about who she worked for, thought about it again. She remembered her uncle shouting at her that he was now the boss when he killed her parents. The girl wondered who she should work for. Before she lost consciousness, she saw Nox hovering over her, breathing heavily and calling her name. And Yu had already defeated that boss and started receiving the reward, but the only thing he cared about was Chitri's life. He shouted to Rona that they needed to get back to the mansion quickly. Chitri smiled weakly, thinking that this was all a lie, because someone who intended to use someone for their own purposes would not look at you like that. But she couldn't understand why she felt a slight tremor and anger in his voice. A stingy tear ran down the girl's cheek, and then she lost consciousness. Theo actually received the same letter saying that Chitri was now a commoner. He noticed that this was a problem. Rudwell said an investigation was conducted which showed that it was true. The Louvier family did indeed disown Chitri. Theo thought that one of the reasons he chose Chitri was the possibility of controlling the Louvier family. Since the previous head of the family had passed away, and the house was now in turmoil, it was an excellent opportunity to subjugate them. In such a difficult time for them, the easiest thing to do is to lend a helping hand to the heiress, and thus achieve their submission. But this event completely changed the plans. Theo asked Rudville about what they should do with Chitri. The butler replied that it was a little beneath his status to allow a commoner to be near young Master Nox. He might be looked down upon at the academy. He said it was better to settle this quietly in the family traditions, and Tell agreed. Then a servant burst into the office, and the butler was outraged by such impudence. The servant said that young Master Nox had just returned with a mortally wounded maid. He said that she was in critical condition due to the poison of an unknown creature, and the young master used an expensive antidote without permission. Rudville asked him if he had used the mandrake cleansing potion, and the servant nodded. The butler exhaled, noticing that it was indeed very expensive, and Theo wondered if Nox had really become so attached to his new maid so quickly. He thought that it was difficult to predict how his personal feelings for the servants would end for him. Chitri slowly opened her eyes, her ears filled with Rona's scream. The girl found herself in bed, and Rona was sobbing next to her. She tried to remember what had happened. She remembered jumping out in front of the monster and couldn't understand why she did it. Rona told her that the young master had insisted on injecting her with an antidote made from mandrake root. She made it clear that this antidote was incredibly effective, and the gentleman didn't care at all about the doctor's arguments. He ordered him to save her life if he didn't want to lose his own. Hearing this, Chitri wondered why the master would go so far. She clutched the blanket, wondering if he was just going to use her. Sitting up, she asked the girl where the young master was now, and Rona exclaimed that she needed to rest. Lost in thought, the girl said that he seemed to have gone to the butler, and she remembered that he had asked her to report when she came to her senses. Leaving the room to find the master, Rona told the girl to rest and that she would be back soon. The door closed, but Chitri, instead of resting, got out of bed and began packing her suitcase. As she packed her things, she thought that she didn't belong here. But the truth was that now there was no place for her anywhere. She took the medallion from her neck and left it next to a note where she wrote Nox's words of gratitude and hope that this pendant would compensate for the losses. She thanked him for saving her life, and putting on her coat, she got ready to leave. Walking along the dark corridors, she suddenly heard a voice that asked her where she was going, and which made her shudder. In front of her, she saw Nox, still wearing the clothes he had been hunting in. When there was no answer, Yu told her seriously that he had only asked a question. Some time ago, Yu brought Chitri to the doctor, who refused to give him an antidote, and the guy asked if some medications really bothered him more than his life. The doctor answered uncertainly that everything was wrong. He said that he had no right to use the drug without the butler's permission. Hearing about the butler, Yu asked the doctor if Rudvel was really higher in rank than him. Without answering, the man merely apologized to the tit. The guy told him that she would sort everything out herself and take responsibility. All he had to do was do what he had to do. The doctor's hand finally reached for the bottle of antidote, and he did not dare to argue any longer. Raising Chitri's head, he began to give her the antidote, saying that the poison had been neutralized so she would recover. Rona exhaled, noticing that it was such a relief, and Yu quickly walked out of the room. Finally, he told Rona to report to him when Chitri woke up. As it turned out, Yu went to Theo, who noticed that he rarely came to him of his own free will. The boy was kneeling, looking up at his father, and his father asked him if he had come because of the maid. After activating the acting master, Yu said that he needed something. He told the man that he promised to fulfill any of his requests, and then he said that he wanted Chitri de Louvier to remain with him despite her exclusion from the family register. The butterfly effect that could affect the plot no longer bothered Yu, nor did the fact that she was a spy. As soon as he saw her trying to shield him, he suddenly realized something. He understood the answer to the question when she remained silent. She didn't need to answer it anymore because she had shown it through her actions. Theo did not contradict the guy and said that if that's what he wanted, then so be it. Getting to his feet, the boy told Theo that this unworthy son wanted to say one more thing. The man allowed him to speak without changing his expression. A notification popped up that the acting master's performance was declining due to his agitated state when the guy told him to stop playing with his people, even if he was his own father. Standing in front of Chitri, Yu asked her again where she was going. The girl's body began to shake slightly as she barely managed to squeeze out that she wanted to leave, that this was not her place. She started thanking the guy for everything and said that it was time for her to leave. Chitri's hands shook as Yu said in a firm voice that this did not answer his question. He asked her again where she was going to go if she had promised to serve him as a maid. Chitri quietly said that he himself knew that she had been ordered by the head of the Reinhofer family to keep an eye on him. Tears ran down her cheeks as she said that this meant that she had been spying on him and informing on him. The guy's expression didn't change when she asked him why he was trying to keep her close to him. Unable to bear it any longer, she screamed that she was a traitor. She screamed that if he drove her away right now, it would be fair. Yu just smiled, thinking that now he understood who was hiding under the mask all this time. Now she looked more like a person. The guy calmly told her that all people lie. Chitri again exclaimed that she had committed a grave crime against him. Yu told her that this was why he wouldn't let her go. He asked her if she was really going to just run away without paying the bills. Not believing her own ears, the girl asked again hesitantly. The guy told her that she was staying and that he didn't know what was going on in his father's head, but he personally wasn't interested in his family. Coming closer, he told her that he was much more interested in her own talents. Passing by her, he told her that he wanted her to help him, being on his side, until she paid for her betrayal. These words made Chitri burst into tears even more than before, and she did not argue anymore. She nodded quietly, indicating that she understood the order. Afterwards, she told him that she would be by his side until the very end and would serve him faithfully. Yu, hearing this, only smiled, having achieved his goal. Then Chitri told him that he once asked her who she worked for, and Yu turned to her. The girl asked him with a genuinely warm smile if he knew the answer now. Smiling back at her, he said that now he knew. The next day, Rona began to tell all the servants that the master had put pressure on the doctor and threatened to kill him. Yu, who suddenly came closer, told her to refrain from discussing her master in his presence. Rona asked him if he had really heard everything, and the guy just hissed irritably, which she didn't even deny. Rona, turning to Chitri, who was holding the basket, told her not to strain herself. She washes everything herself. Quickly taking the basket, the girl retreated away from her master. Yu asked why she had such a cunning face. He asked Chitri if she remembered that she was going with him to the Elden Academy in 2 months, to which she replied that she had already started preparing. She said that she had already collected the basic supplies for study: books, notebooks, first aid kit, clothes, uniform for travel, materials, and so on. The girl continued her story, and Yu noticed that Chitri no longer forced herself to smile at him. He noticed that he felt more comfortable communicating with her. Now they don't need to bow and scrape at each other, or have meaningless conversations about the weather. Noticing the gentleman's gaze, Chitri smiled at him. The boy thought that he knew that even if they were driven into a corner and suddenly forced to fight back to back, neither of them would betray the other. Smiling back, he thought that was all they needed. Chitri suddenly asked him if everything would be okay with him. She told him that there had been some unpleasant rumors circulating about him lately. He jumped up in his chair and asked again, wondering if something had managed to ruin his already bad reputation. A little embarrassed, the girl said that they say he kept her with him because he likes her. She said it was all just a rumor. Having calmed down a little, Yu thought about who he was and never imagined that in the role of Nox, he would experience such shame. He apologized to the girl for getting into trouble because of him, to which she replied that that was not why she told about the rumors. She did it because she was afraid that they would make him uncomfortable. Sighing, Yu said that there were already rumors going around about him, that he was a worthless idiot, a disgrace to a glorious family. Looking away, Chitri said that everything was not so bad. The guy told her that he would fire her if she was going to lie. Then the girl admitted that there were such rumors, and she said that she also heard that he is quite a pervert. The guy covered his face with his hands and asked again. He sat back down in his chair, thinking that his image should have improved. Before he was just a weak nobody, but now he is a deceiver who takes people by the nose. He thought about maintaining a balance. After all, Nox is the villain, so he should be the one motivating the main characters. You thought that he didn't care, because he wasn't a real character in the prophetic dream. Waving his hand, he told Chitri to forget all these rumors. He told her that he had a task for her. The guy told her that it was not only she who needed to prepare for the camellia, but he too.